The very first events in the story begin in a dark and gloomy courtyard, from the windows of which the light is shining, while around it the rain and wind rage branches and leaves swaying as if in a terrible nightmare. The main character, who had incredible hair that shimmered like fire even in the dimmest light and had a rich golden color, was sleeping in the castle and was about to wake up. As soon as she opened her eyes, she noticed in front of her a very pretentious aristocrat with blonde hair and dark skin, who was pouring wine from a glass on her and looking down, asking if she was awake. The heroine's blonde hair quickly turned red at the crown due to the alcoholic drink, until she herself couldn't understand why she was hearing a man's voice or where she was, as if she were actually changing clothes here for the first time. Raising her head and looking at the one standing in front of her, the lady realized that the handsome man not only had interesting white hair, but also red eyes, with which he angrily looked at her, telling her that she had slipped poison into his own domain. With her head down, the main character looked closely at her own reflection in a drop of wine, not understanding who she was or where she was, which is why her face showed not only wariness but also fear. After that, she reached out to her head as if it hurt, continuing to think about who she was in this world, who was standing in front of her, and what had happened earlier that led to such events. Remembering everything, the girl looked up and was surprised to realize that she had been reborn, looking at something with deep crimson eyes and an open mouth, because she could not believe that her life had not ended, but had acquired new colors. Imagining herself in front of a computer, with a pile of papers, and in a tired pose, the lady remembered that her name was Belle, and that she had previously been a sales manager in a pharmaceutical company, which made her very surprised. But when she was 27 years old, she died due to a lot of overtime work, which caused her to remember herself in the hospital when in the last moments of her life she was wearing an oxygen mask. However, she was never destined to die and fall into the void, because she found herself in the middle of a shining blue circle when she herself looked up and when someone spoke to her, introducing himself as a system for moving through worlds, and he is desperately searching for the owner who died while carrying out a mission in the world. And because of this, he offers the heroine a second life, having given up her noble status and beauty. The girl with short light hair and surprised eyes stared intently, not believing what was happening, even when the system told her that the mod would give her a second life, where she would be an important character in a novel if she agreed. Then she lowered her head, still wearing her medical uniform for patients, and carefully thinking about how things couldn't get any worse, and that she had nothing to lose if she accepted the system's offer and lived a second life. The lady loudly said that she agreed to the life of an important character given to her, and a cute creature with horns, and a small smile quickly appeared in front of her, waving its arms, performing magic to make everything happen. Under the spell of the little monster, who offered her a new life, the main character instantly fell to the floor, losing consciousness, and preparing to see herself in a new body among other people and in a strange place. And so she found herself in the dark chambers of the aristocrat himself, where there were not only impressive ceilings with golden patterns, but also equally high windows, with thick curtains near which were incomparable columns. As soon as the lady noticed the handsome man with a glass of drink in his hands, she quickly became agitated, asking the little monster if he was the main character in the novel. But he said that this was not so, and his name was Argus. While the guy in the incredible suit stood nearby and placed the glass on the table, the blonde looked at him with horror on his face, because the little boy with horns was saying that he was the main villain in the story and the half-brother of the main character. She continued to sit on the floor with her arms folded, because in her head she was listening to the monster's brief instructions, explaining to her that she herself was not the main character, even if she had not met the central character of the novel. But her hopes for the best still did not fade, and she continued to remain silent, not making any unnecessary movements, even when the mysterious blonde approached her and touched her cheek, which caused the lady to instantly blush. The little monster continued to fill Madame in on the situation, presenting an open book with a quill and ink explaining that she had been reborn as a medieval fantasy based on the persecution of a curse. The reason why the novella has such an interesting theme is that the blood of the entire family in history was cursed due to black magic from the East, which is why 4 aristocrats, ladies, as well as gentlemen, were influenced by the curse. Imagining a blonde man in a passionate kiss, with a girl, the system in the form of a child, explained that during an attack of lust, a person would turn into a bloodthirsty monster and, against his will, kill his beloved. Also, because of the monster's words, the heroine imagined the blonde man himself, in whose arms was the lady whose life seemed to be leaving her when he sucked her blood like a vampire, succumbing to magic, and in fact, not wishing her pain. Then, from the system's stories, the heroine realized that the Rassam family, under the guidance of the creator god, began to search for a girl immune to the curse that is Saint Tranti. And at this time, the heroine was already imagining a golden lady with wings. But the system didn't decide to dwell on the main character's family for long, telling Belle about the main character, with soft pink hair, whose name is Heidi, and she alone is Saint Tranti. And all the battles in the novel occur because of her. When the heroine asked the monster if she was that same girl, he replied that she was not, since she was only Bellu, who was now 17 years old, and who was the daughter of Count Karen, who loved to drink tea in the palace. Imagining herself while knights bowed before her and kissed her hand, the system told her that she possessed incomparable beauty, just like the main character of the novel, which is why she seduced all the men in a row. She imagined herself with a fan in her hands, portraying a playful look, and listening to the words of the system, saying that she is a lady with an ideal origin, incomparable beauty, who was painlessly resurrected, which is ideal. Then a small monster with horns and an evil smile raised his hands up while listening to the lady's dissatisfaction, saying that he did not want to be an ordinary noblewoman, but he replied that she should be grateful for any life. The monster also suggested that in a normal plot, the protagonist reveals the identity of the protagonist Saint Tranti, and they fall in love at the banquet that Belle imagined. However, according to the plot, the relationship between the heroines was noticed by Heidi's older sister Sasha, who looked at her sister with displeasure and was embittered by her happiness and the way she hugged the guy. Having forced the maids to join her plan, Sasha decided to take revenge on her sister by drugging her and Argus with the servants' hands so that they would fall in love with each other and make love. The heroine continued to listen to the story with a wary face, imagining next to her a board with an image of the insidious Sasha, who is rubbing her hands, wanting to break the love between the main character and the heroine with the help of Argus. But when the lady asked what she had to do with this plan, the system told her that in order for this terrible event to not happen, she should replace the main character and spend the night with Argus instead, and suppress his curse, which is why she literally froze from silent shock. Beads of sweat immediately began to run down her face as she screamed in amazement, calling the monster Lolo, and telling him why he wanted to send her to her death, since she was not the main character, and she was not immune to the curse. When the girl began asking Lolo a lot of questions, being in a dark palace, which was embraced by the night, and clouds emitting evil lightning and heavy rain, the monster himself said that now everything depended only on her. Lolo cut off contact with her and wished her luck at the moment when Argus was already approaching her. Because of the lady, she was worried that her life that had just begun was about to end, and because of this, she had to fight. Argus looked at the defenseless girl with red eyes, in a piercing voice ordering her to tell who had slipped poison into his palace, in exchange for leaving her lifeless body unharmed. The guy with white hair and thick fur was already extending his hand to Belle, which made her nervously move away from him, afraid even of touching and looking at him with fear, as if he was about to attack her. But his hand continued to reach out to her, while his garnet eyes never took their eyes off hers, as if he were a real monster to be feared. And the heroine felt it perfectly well, because he only promised to deal with her. The lady's fear of dying became so great that she did not want to move, looking straight into the aristocrat's eyes, while he touched her cheek without any resistance, and while a drop of cold sweat flowed down it. While she was thinking that there must be a way to save herself from death, Argus himself looked at her and smiled, asking why she did not ask him for mercy, and whether she was afraid of a terrible death for her silence. Suddenly, he began to move his legs, continuing to talk to the silent lady, saying that he had not seen her before in social circles, but that would not stop him from admiring her beauty, which captivated every man, including him. The aristocrat's actions turned out to be as predictable as his words, because he abruptly sat down on his knees in front of the girl, continuing to touch her face and say that he would not fall for her pretty face. The girl continued to remain silent, even when Argus came even closer in front of her, peering into her frightened eyes, and holding her chin, asking why she was ignoring him, without saying a word. The very next moment, the kind and slow-moving aristocrat sharply squeezed the heroine's throat, causing her to grit her teeth and squeal in pain, while Argus whispered that he wouldn't regret it if he crushed her like a bug. He was already wrapping his hand around her neck in order to quickly bite her with his sharp teeth and taste her blood. But the lady, numb with fear, continued to nervously think that there had to be a way out of this terrible situation. Argus licked his lips, anticipating the long-awaited taste of blood, because as he thought, she didn't even plan to stop him, but was only silent and motionless from complete horror, although in fact she was looking for a way out of the situation. Then he loudly told the girl that this evening she would be his antidote, after which, with the same hand, he quickly and strongly grabbed the lady by the shoulders, pressing her to himself, while his face was already approaching her neck to bite. But unexpectedly, for the aristocrat himself, the main character at the very last moment raised her head and shouted to him in despair that she did not want to die, continuing to go over in her mind the options for resolving the situation. The couple found themselves near a dark window, against which large drops of rain were beating, creating an awkward silence in which Belle uttered the name of Mr. Argus, as if preparing to tell him something important. The lady's screams made the man stop and move away from her, causing him to look into her eyes with a slightly dissatisfied look, as if he was about to hear not only her voice, but also proof of why she should live. He continued to hold her by the wrists, not giving her even a hope of leaving or running away. But the heroine didn't need this because she looked at him desperately, shouting that she knew a way to suppress the curse. Outside, the rain was still pouring down, and it seemed like the drops were only getting bigger, which is why they were hitting the roof with a rattling sound while a golden light was burning in the windows, and while in one of the rooms there was a heroine saving her life. An awkward silence passed between them, as if the girl had said something surprising. But he did not let her go for a moment, even leaning her against the wall, asking what she had just said, while the lady was embarrassed and afraid. He was very angry, looking down at the girl and repeating questions to her in growls like what she just said, because he no longer wanted to quickly kill her, but to question her about what he heard. The aristocrat only lowered her head in embarrassment and turned her away, while the man continued to hold her hands and stare intently, waiting for an answer. But the frightened madam said that first he should let her go. The thing is, the curse in the novel is accompanied by an uncontrollable thirst for blood, which is why many of the ladies in Rassam's family fell to the floor from helplessness, like one blonde lady in a white nightgown. And the main character, suddenly remembering this, decided to leave the company of the aristocrat with lightning speed to run away from him as fast as she could, while he himself continued to hold his hands up, not understanding the behavior of the unfortunate woman. As it turned out, the lady needed to immediately run to the nightstand on which the aristocrat had previously left his glass of wine, reflecting on the fact that during intercourse, the partner sucks blood like a wild animal until the victim dies. Remembering all the most important things, Belle hastened to immediately take off her gloves, because what she had decided to do would require special attention, and no accessories should interfere with her. All this time, Mr. Argus watched her with red eyes, sometimes raising his eyebrows in surprise, and warning the beauty in a loud voice that she would be in great trouble if she decided to play with him. But the main character no longer heard him, because she only needed the aristocrat's glass, which she took in her hands, and then threw it on the floor with such a clang that it shattered into large pieces. And the lady picked up one of these fragments right into her palm, which had previously been exposed by the glove, after which she squeezed it with all her strength, forcing herself to cut herself, which instantly released blood, while she herself was thinking about the fact that she must give Argos enough blood if he wanted it. Raising her bloody hand and ignoring the intense throbbing pain, the lady looked at the handsome man very angrily and also decisively asked if giving him enough blood would suppress his curse. She looked at him with sweet crimson eyes. But in her words, she was firm and even too confident, because she continued to bombard Argus with questions like, why seduce her if he already hated women? But this only seemed to amuse the gentleman even more, which is why he looked at her very intently and angrily, muttering through his teeth that the heroine seemed to know a lot of things if she spoke so confidently. Earlier, Lolo told her that his mother had lived with his father for a long time, enjoyed her favorite flowers, and was happy not even suspecting that she had a mistress nearby, but because of whom she wrote a farewell letter to her son. After some time, Argus's mother noticed that her husband was hugging his mistress, which caused her to go mad with grief, standing in the corridor in the shadows with her head bowed, preparing to leave the palace at any moment and write a letter to the child. She covered her face with sadness, not even thinking about love or children. And that is why little Argos remained lying in his crib when his mother was preparing to leave him, because she could no longer ask for a father. And thus, having imagined little Argos in her head, the lady realized that he was always left alone and did not have any of the joys of childhood, even when he was given teddy bears and rabbits, because he wanted his mother's love. When he began to grow up, became a real aristocrat, and acquired his own servants, including maids, they only bowed their heads sadly to him because they knew that he hated women with all his soul. But sometimes gossips in the form of aristocratic women would whisper behind his back about what an attractive and mystical man he was. But the young gentleman didn't care, because he didn't even want to look at the weaker sex. In the novel, this was described in chapter 16. But in reality, Belle only got to know the story's main villain better by imagining him completely alone in direct light, as if he had nothing but darkness around him. But the aristocrat, meanwhile, did not understand how the main character knew everything about him, which is why he grabbed her wrists again while blood was flowing from one. He repeated, asking Belle what else she knew and whether he needed to kill her. But Belle didn't plan to answer the gentleman. She just looked at him with pitiful eyes, hoping that he would have mercy on her, also saying that he could believe her or not. But this was all a real misunderstanding. But the lady's words truly touched the aristocrat Argos, because he looked at her thoughtfully, still sternly remembering that she even cut her hand for him, but never gave away her client, which meant she was more harmless. However, one glance from the gentleman was enough for the fair-haired beauty to start crying, because she did not understand why she needed to apologize to an unknown person because of some other lady with bad intentions. She wanted to prove to Argos once again that she had no involvement in the evil plans of his criminals, so she clenched her fists, saying once again with venom and tears that she was not really guilty of anything. As soon as the heroine said that she knew the real culprit, the white-haired gentleman immediately looked at her with bewilderment, crossing his arms, which alarmed Belle even more, and she thought that Argos would not believe her. The gentleman's silence and reflection were so long that she continued to tremble with fear, while the man looked at her angrily as if waiting for her to say more. But this never happened, and they simply looked at each other as if the aristocrat thought she was lying. The girl recalled the original plot and imagined many people around one door, recalling that in the novel, a supporting character named Sasha believed that she had succeeded in her plan and that her cunning had come true. Immediately after a crowd of men and women gathered near the door of Argos's chambers, they opened it with a bang to see with their own eyes how the gentleman would seduce the main character, the beloved of the main character. And they really expected what they were expecting, because on the bed, they could see a half-naked aristocrat next to whom Heidi was lying, which is why everyone thought that they were lovers, but no one guessed that they were on drugs. They ran into the room in shock and looked at the bed, while the villain named Argos drank the blood of the main character of the novel. But in fact, he was under the influence of a spell that forced him to do the same as Heidi. Everyone, even Haley's lover, saw with their own eyes how the love of their life lay in bed with another man succumbing to his charms from which she could have died at any moment. Every breath of hers would be her last. He seemed to hold her carefully in his arms, but everyone then realized that for such an offense in which he had ruined the life of a noble lady and also dishonored her, he was expelled from the aristocratic circle with contempt and humiliation. Because of this, Belle instantly imagined in her head a few strange violet eyes that seemed to look into Argos's soul, while people turned away from him and despised him, although in fact he did not want to kill. Also, thanks to the fact that she already knew the plot of the novel, the girl remembered that Argos was not destined for the throne after Heidi's dishonor, since the head of the Rassam family reconsidered his right to power, as if wrapping him in thorny roses. Remembering all this, the girl with golden hair looked at the gentleman with a blush on her face, saying directly that Lady Sasha from the Mount Bennet family would burst in here now along with his brother. The man seemed to be seriously considering the girl's words, which is why he continued to hold his hand near his chin and look at her, asking why he should believe her. The lady looked at him calmly, holding her bloody hand, and saying that if he forced her into sex, he would have a terrible reputation and would become the epicenter of a scandal. While the aristocrat stood in front of her, not understanding anything and asking what she meant, the girl looked at him persistently and angrily, briefly explaining that he should simply drink her blood so as not to lose everything and then let her go. The lady's speech only made Argos smile as he took off his dark tie and tied it to the girl's wound, looking angrily at his palm, and saying that she was very cunning if she asked him to let her go for his own good. Having made a strong knot, the man forced the young beauty's blood to stop flowing from the wound, and the pain in her palm gradually subsided, while Argos warned her that he would let her go, but wanted to tell her something important. Suddenly, he leaned so close to the lady that she had to look him in the eye, while he threatened that if he found out that she had lied to him, he would get her even to the ends of the earth and bring her back here to punish her sooner. Looking at Madame with red eyes, which were adorned with snow-white eyelashes and hair, Argos repeated that he would bring her back here, find her anywhere, if he found out that she had lied to his face. Meanwhile, in the palace itself, the very scene was already taking place when Sasha began to implement her plan, when the main character in the novel, named Sill Heidi's purple-haired lover, was gracefully walking in the hall. He would have continued standing there and looking at everyone if Heidi's older sister Sasha hadn't suddenly run up to him. She's actually the heroine's manager, which is why she wants to lie to Celia, saying that her sister is cheating on him. The alarmed man immediately turned to the girl, not understanding what was going on, because he was unable to guess that Sasha herself had already cunningly thought everything through, and all that was left for her to do was pretend to look pitiful and tell him everything. She did so, which is why Sasha's eyes, which were too feigned sad and on the verge of tears, looked at Celia. She said that she saw how one gentleman forcibly dragged her beloved away somewhere. Hearing this, the purple-haired aristocrat immediately followed Sasha, taking her word for it, and ordering the others to guard the entrances and exits, while the rest followed him to Argos. No one noticed Sasha's sly and evil smile, which she had deliberately staged, because her envy of her sister's happiness was stronger, and she was ready to make her look ignoble in the eyes of others. Meanwhile, the main character herself has just escaped from Argos's chambers, trying to hide because only he knows that now there will be a crowd of people near her room. But now she is looking at a beautiful corridor with columns and candles. At times, the lady lowered her crimson eyes and looked at her bandaged wound on her palm, wondering if she would get tetanus from the cut, which was still hurting a little, and unpleasantly so. But she didn't have time to cry, so she quickly collected her thoughts and walked down the corridor at a fast pace, twitching a little because she felt dizzy. It was not clear why. Unexpectedly for herself, the lady realized that she did not feel solidity under her feet due to their shaking, and therefore was already preparing to fall to the floor with the thoughts that it was not time to die yet, and she needed someone who would help her if everything was so bad. Belle fell with a crash onto the wooden floor, where she thought no one would help because the long corridor was completely empty, but she suddenly turned her head towards the female voice, also noticing a beautiful lady ahead. And while the story's main character was running from Argos's chambers, lying on the floor, and trying to wait for the help that came to her, people were already rushing to the aristocrat, while a raging downpour rained outside the window, swaying the branches. A great many noblemen had already gathered at Argos's door, while Sill knocked on it with increasing force, shouting that someone had kidnapped a noble lady named Heidi, and that they suspected him. The men at the back of the crowd were smiling and asking each other who could have done this so brazenly right at Duke Rassam's banquet, knowing that he really liked Heidi and would never let anyone hurt her. Also, gossiping were the two friends with the fan who looked at the door with disdain, and wanted to know, first of all, whether Argos was the most treacherous of men who dared to seduce a noble lady. And Sill himself could not wait, so he did not wait for an answer from Argos, throwing open the doors, himself, shouting to the villain of the novel that silence would not help him save himself, and everyone knew that it was he who stole Heidi. But the whole time, the white-haired aristocrat didn't even move, continuing to sit somewhere and look at the uninvited guests with red eyes, telling everyone that they were very rude. Anyone who wanted to catch Argos in the embrace with Heidi on the bed rushed to him and came closer, while he continued to sit on the chair like a calm lion, even when Sill ordered him to immediately return the lady whom he had not actually stolen anyway. He just crossed his legs with a smile, continuing to laugh at everyone and say that they were mistaken and that all their words were nonsense. But Sill insisted on his own, saying that he would teach him a lesson anyway because he knew that he had stolen Heidi. Everyone immediately started whispering among themselves, not understanding how this could be. But the purple-haired aristocrat only became angry, looking at his opponent angrily, and saying that in that case, he would search him. The albino was calm, remembering the mysterious main character, whose words turned out to be true after all, and telling Sill that his room was not some kind of walk-through yard, and that things would not work out like this. But Argos's words were just an empty sound for Sill, because he waved his hand angrily, ordering the servants to immediately search the premises, to which they quickly responded and ran to carry out the order. When the boy turned away from the white-haired handsome man with the intention of shouting at the guards to hurry to the site, the aristocrat himself continued to sit in the chair and watch Sill, realizing that he would pay for everything. Meanwhile, the guards themselves continued to search every corner of Argos's room and check every closet in the hope that they would immediately find the lost main character. But this never happened, and Sasha's face instantly showed genuine shock and alarm when she heard the guards say firmly and clearly that they hadn't found anyone, and that there really was no one here, which meant that she had lied to everyone, and her plan had failed. While everyone around her was rebelling and couldn't believe their ears, Sasha stood out from the crowd with anxiety and nail-biting because she herself didn't understand how this was possible since the poison had been successfully given to the right person. Sill instantly realized that the brown-haired lady was deceiving him, so he moved her as close to him as possible, angrily asking what was going on, when Sasha looked at him pitifully and said that she really did see someone in the room. But the misunderstanding between the couple was broken by Argus himself, who slowly stood up and with his head down asked the purple-haired Celia if he was now satisfied with the fact that he had unnecessarily upset and shocked everyone. He was still dissatisfied with Argus, even if the guards had proven his innocence, which is why he looked at him with displeasure, saying that they had not finished with this yet, and he would look for additional evidence. To everyone's surprise, Argus only looked indifferently at his opponent from the window, asking if they would end today's commotion, and if he was satisfied with his work. His red eyes looked only at Sill, who was blaming him for everything, and therefore he did not want to forgive him so easily, directly saying that he would not get away with it if he wanted to humiliate him in front of everyone. So he decided to quickly call his personal butler, with a gray mustache and hair named Isu, who bowed to his master, while he ordered every servant who broke into his chambers to have their legs and arms broken, and also sent to the slave market for disturbing him. Hearing such a cruel punishment for the commoners, Sill turned to Argus and wanted to say something to him, but did not dare, only looking at him with a furious gaze, in which there was also indignation. And the servants, hearing their new fate, immediately screamed in shock and became alarmed, shouting to Argus to spare them and not punish them, although such a cruel man as he did not think of changing his decision. Also passing by his brother Sill, who was shocked by what was happening, Argus said that next time he should not forget to take his brain with him, because it is a very useful thing that will not allow him to trust some girl. The aristocrats present at the terrible event could only watch with their mouths open as Argus's servants begged for mercy. But he did not even think about them when they allowed his peace to be disturbed and made to look like an idiot. He, as if nothing had happened, sat back down in his chair and looked at everyone with satisfaction, while the butler stood nearby and said that they had completed everything, and he also asked if there were any more orders. The stern and merciless Eratsort looked at everyone with a garnet eye, and with a frown ordered only a very thorough investigation of the event that had occurred today, because as he understood, everything was far from simple. Also, folding his hands, the man with the luxurious decorations on his clothes ordered each servant not only to find out everything about what happened, but also to find out everything about the very lady who was in his chambers before, because she helped him and did not lie. Meanwhile, Belle herself occasionally recalled her past, namely those moments when she still lived with her parents in her past life, when she was a little baby who lay in bed in a bright living room and screamed and cried. Her mother looked after her very carefully, picking her up and rocking her while she talked to Belle's father, who was standing nearby, and with his hands on his hips, was telling his wife not to meddle in men's business and not to spoil his mood. Even when the main character was 4 years old and could walk on her legs, she looked sadly at her dad, who was arguing with her mom with an angry face, saying that it was her fault he married her and also that he didn't force her to give birth. And when Belle turned 14 and sat at the table with headphones on, so as not to hear her parents arguing, she still caught them arguing about money, saying there wasn't enough of it, and everyone was to blame. As soon as Belle turned 16, she quickly put on a pink dress and hurried out of the house, holding the handle of the suitcase with her hand, and leaving it as quickly as possible because her parents were already finally divorced. But even when she got rid of her toxic parents and began to live independently, her problems did not go away, because having cut her hair and made hidden bangs, she often felt lonely. And when she turned 24 and worked in a bright office, one blonde began looking for her in the offices, because as her boss, debt collectors came to see her, as well as uninvited guests. These were the people her dad owed money to. And so they came to the main character, leaning her against the wall and smilingly saying that she should return every single one if she didn't want to disgrace her company like the boss. But that wasn't all, because after that, when she turned 26, she sat in a cafe across from her boyfriend and sadly listened to him say that they needed to break up because his parents found out what a debtor she was. Therefore, the main character's life was not long and happy, because the following year she died from overwork, which is why she ended up in the hospital where doctors carried her on a stretcher, hoping to save her. Her eyes still wanted to see many colors in life, but they were about to close because the heroine's strength was running out very quickly, as was the hope that the world would be fair. She died a quiet and painful death, leaving behind only her lifeless body on a hospital stretcher, covered with a white cloth, while the blue colors of loneliness continued to reign around her. But suddenly, Belle woke up in a new body and with a new name, realizing that it was just a terrible nightmare about her past life, from which she opened her eyes and mouth so wide, as if horrified. Rising from her soft bed, the golden-haired lady grabbed her head and winced as she felt a severe headache that also made her eyes spin. Then she decided to look at her hands and was surprised to realize that her wound from the glass shard had been treated by someone. But she continued to think that she was just living someone else's life and that in fact she had died. She also began to examine the room she was in, turning her head in different directions and realizing that someone had taken care of her, but she did not understand who it could be. And as soon as she had admired the apartment, she suddenly noticed in front of her a sweet girl with blush on her cheeks and sweet eyes, who was looking at her with her fists near her face, saying that she was glad that she woke up. Looking into the young lady's face, the main character remembered that it was at her feet that she had fallen, because she had lost consciousness when the pink-haired lady herself had tried to wake her up and understand what was going on. Continuing to lie on the luxurious bed, the protagonist understood that not everything was so bad if in the lonely corridor she still met someone who decided to help her and did not pass by. That's why Belle looked at the girl without fear, and vice versa, smiling at her, thanking her for her care and help, while the pink-haired beauty looked at her and was glad that everything was fine with Belle. Covering her sad emotions with her hand, the girl continued to talk to Belle, confessing that she was very scared when she fell to the floor and stopped breathing, because then she was afraid that she had gone to heaven forever. And the heroine's words truly saddened Belle, causing her to look to the side with downcast eyes, remembering that she had actually wanted to commit suicide in her past life, because she could not stand the wrath of fate. But then, feeling sad, she imagined a dice in her head, realizing that if in her past life she couldn't decide anything and simply lived a dog's life, then this time she herself decides who to be and how to live. The lady standing next to the main character immediately came closer to her and apologized for her overly harsh words, citing tactlessness, But the golden-haired lady continued to sit on the bed as if she was not offended by anything. Looking at the girl with a smile, the pink-faced lady said that her temperature was normal, which meant that everything was fine with her, and this made her very happy, because of which everything around even sparkled with bright highlights and colors. But unlike her new friend Belle, wasn't so happy, because she looked at her with her mouth slightly open, and sadly realized that this stranger was the first person who treated her well in this place. Realizing also that despite looking at such a sweet man, she still hadn't asked his name, the girl leaned closer to her, with a blush on her desperate face, saying that despite the long conversation, she wanted to know who she was. Then the charming lady with pink hair decided to calmly sit on the chair, looking at the main character and apologizing for the misunderstanding, also saying that her name was Haley and she was very glad to meet her. Having imagined in her head the book and the novel she found herself in the heroine, was surprised to realize that standing before her was the very same Heidi whom Sasha wanted to slander, who was also the youngest daughter in the Mountbatten family, which in turn is one of the two main families in the Empire of Charlemagne. Imagining her with maid clothes and a basket of fruit, the lady remembered that according to history, she never awakened her magical powers, which is why she was kicked out of the family. But when she became Saint Tranty, everything changed. And when Sasha appeared next to Heidi, it seemed that she was more successful and charismatic than her younger sister, which is why she smiled and wielded magic, while the heroine standing next to her could not boast of her achievements. That's why Heidi felt uncomfortable at the banquet this evening, surrounded by high-ranking people, and that's why she decided to leave the room, while they continued to pester her with questions, as Belle imagined. Imagining herself behind the desperate Heidi, the lady realized that perhaps she too felt lost, which meant that they were clearly similar, not only externally, but also internally. But the protagonist of the story was pulled out of her deep thoughts by Heidi herself, who looked at her folding her hands in front of her face and asked what her name was, because according to her, she had not yet met any ladies because she came from the village. The main character also decided to smile, looking at the sweet green-eyed girl, answering that her name is Belle, and she is from the Karen family, not even suspecting how much her new friend would be surprised by this. Her olive eyes quickly widened and became even more intense because her soul was filled with joy, which is why she said that she was the first aristocrat she knew, and that is why she asked to become her friend. Unsuspectingly, the golden-haired beauty with red eyes told Heidi that they could of course be friends. But suddenly, Lolo appeared next to her, smiling and warning that they couldn't be friends. He, realizing that only the main character sees him, immediately flew away from her, because Belle was angry with him because of this, not understanding why she could not make friends with the one who saved her. Lolo continued to run away from the main character and deliberately fly near her, cheerfully waving his arms and saying that he missed her very much, while Belle behind him literally lit up with anger towards him. But the monster's joy didn't last long, because the lady with golden hair quickly caught him in her arms and stomped on his head, causing the creature to immediately fall silent and turn into a harmless ball. When Lolo received a blow to the head, he turned to the heroine who was furious with him, asking why she shouldn't be friends with Heidi, and then the monster replied that she should create difficulties for her and not be friends with her because she plays the role of a passerby in this story, and if she starts any positive relationship with her, he will have to destroy her. But the protagonist was not happy with this, which is why she could not find the words to express her displeasure, continuing to look angrily at Lolo, and not understanding why such a strange rule from a wondrous creature even exists. The lady had to imagine all this only in her head, because she continued to sit on the bed and look at Heidi, saying that they would not be friends, but already with the understanding that this was contraindicated in the plot. The heroine's refusal immediately embarrassed Heidi, causing her to put her hands on her knees, looking at her with despair, saying that she does not know etiquette, for which she apologizes. But Belle continued to say that everything is not so bad and everything is fine. The protagonist didn't even expect that the girl would quickly leave her out of embarrassment and confusion, rushing towards the exit at high speed and saying that it was time for her to go, while the heroine looked at her just like Lolo. The little monster flew around the lady's head and watched what was happening, while the main character followed Heidi with her gaze, realizing that she was definitely from the village if she could run so fast. Lolo had 2 bandages on his body, but he continued to fly around his owner with a sweet face as if he needed something from the main character and was about to say it. She decided to look at him with a smirk and ask what he wanted from her, but unexpectedly heard from him that since the mission to dedicate herself to Argus had failed, the punishment would be carried out. Little Lolo said this with such a smile on his face that it was not difficult for the main character to guess that he wanted to take revenge on her for the blow to the head, inventing punishments in his head and making Belle indignant again. Hearing something strange from the little monster, Belle only looked at him with a fake smile and fear asking what he meant, while her face turned blue with fear. But when Lolo was explaining that if the task was failed, something very important would be sent to her, and if she completed everything she could receive random rewards, a maid entered her bedroom saying that she had finally found her. And judging by the events, this task has just come into effect, because the maid approached Belle lying in bed and said that her father had just passed away, and she was very distant. The next day, when everyone gathered in the snow-white palace to say goodbye to the deceased duke, the sky above the castle was very dark and gloomy, which only made everyone sadder. The protagonist of the story was already standing in front of her father's open coffin, and in front of him himself, looking with an empty face at the cloth that covered the head of her once living father, from which everything in her soul seemed to die. There were also other aristocrats in the hall who were very surprised by the death of Count Karen, talking among themselves about how he died due to severe alcoholism, which was what destroyed him. Among the crowd of people, 2 gossips were also talking, telling each other that they had only seen him at a banquet yesterday, and now fate had decided to take his life, and whether this meant that the heroine was the only heir. Sometimes everyone looked at the main character, who stood in a blue dress and did not cry, which is what people paid attention to, saying that her father took great care of her, and in the end, she did not regret his departure. Countess Karen Belle's stepmother stood next to the coffin, wiping away her tears with a handkerchief, while the gossips continued to say that the main character's life was given to an unknown dancer, which was shameful. And while the protagonist of the story was thinking that it was very difficult for her to portray grief on her face, since she herself had never even seen her father having been reborn in a new body, she suddenly remembered Lolo's words about the task and understood everything. Looking closely at her father's face, the girl understood that trouble always comes suddenly when everything in her life began so spontaneously, but she still wants to live to show everyone that she is worthy of her legacy. The girl remembered that her own past was hardly mentioned in the novel, but she knew that her mother was a beautiful dancer with purple hair, with whom her father fell in love, and which she imagined. The girl also introduced her young father and mother, recalling from the novel that Count Karan started a family with her very quickly, as he fell in love at first sight, quickly marrying in white robes. Imagining her mother giving birth with maids around to help her through the delivery, the heroine realized that her mother had died in childbirth when she became pregnant with her a year after their wedding. As a result, she imagined herself a small baby in cloth with golden hair, screaming and crying, not yet understanding that the person closest to her had given her life for her. Immediately after the death of his beloved wife, Count Karan sank into drunkenness and could not stop because he constantly drank, fell to the floor, and peered at the family portrait which still depicted his beloved woman. This went on for several years, but suddenly stopped one day when he was once again lying on the table next to empty bottles of alcohol. But on that day, a woman ran up to him saying that a big trouble had happened. The man's eyes widened in horror when he heard from the maid that his own daughter had disappeared somewhere near the lake, and from these words the father's face darkened with fear that he could lose his daughter as easily as his wife. Without thinking for a second, he threw on his coat and immediately ran out into the street, leaving the beautifully decorated bright room with the hope that little Belle would wait for him and not do anything stupid. Belle herself was hiding on the branch of a tall tree, clearly afraid of heights and falling. But when she heard voices nearby, she turned around in the hope that she would be found in the darkness of the night. And as soon as she noticed her dad for even a moment, tears immediately welled up in her eyes, and she was ready to respond to his voice, but only quietly uttered his name, trembling with fear and cold. The golden-haired father quickly saw his daughter in the tree, looking at her with shock, and ordering her not to move, also turning to the servant to bring a ladder so that he could get the girl out without harm. But her father reacted too late, because the branch the girl was sitting on broke with a crash, causing Belle to fall into the water and begin to flounder, while her father was already preparing to dive into the water and save her. The lake turned out to be very deep, which is why the white-haired beauty, who didn't know how to swim anyway, quickly took in water and began to drown. But her dad swam after her to the bottom, already stretching out his hands to grab her. He managed to save his daughter, after which he quickly got out of the cold water, brought Belle back to consciousness, and began to hold her in his arms, telling her that everything was fine now, while she herself was coughing and shivering from the cold. But he was very surprised, and seemed to freeze when the lady did not become afraid of anything, but only asked him for forgiveness for creating problems, also saying that she wanted him to no longer turn away from her. Being completely in the water, he bowed his head to his daughter and said with a smile that he would never do that again, that he would love her for the rest of his life, because he realized that he had made a huge mistake by drinking himself into a stupor. From that day on, the Count started life with a clean slate, which is why he quickly found himself a new wife, whom he also introduced to Belle, watching as his daughter curiously reached out her hands to the lady in the blue dress. The little girl quickly became attached to her father's new lover, which is why she often read the child bedtime stories about princesses and princes, until the girl herself realized that her stepmother was not evil, as described in the novels. Their relationship was such that it was as if they were real relatives, which is why the stepmother was quickly depicted in framed photographs of them having a good time, and the golden-haired girl even kissed her new mother on the cheek. Remembering all this, the main character realized that, although this man could provide him with support, that is why she walked to the black carriage after the last meeting with her father, not alone, but with her stepmother, while the servant looked at them. The girl expected that a woman in a cute hat and dark pink hair would appear behind her and put her arm around her shoulders, saying in an overly sad, almost feigned tone that she should now take care of her like her own daughter. The main character didn't fully understand her stepmother's intentions, but she was still pleased by her support, which is why there was at least a drop of hope in her ruby eyes, and not just sadness, because she knew that with her she would feel better. But a certain anger still appeared on her face when she told her stepmother, as if nothing had happened, that she believed her, while the woman herself looked at her stepdaughter with such a terrible and insidious smile that no one else had. After some time, Belle was already in her room, because she needed to change her clothes once again, which was very tiring for her, and made her rub her eyes from fatigue, not understanding why she needed to have so many outfits. The maid could not help but notice the sad mood of the mistress, looking at her with understanding and holding a new beige dress in her hands, telling the lady that she was a real mistress, and therefore she should represent her family as befits. Unable to bear the attention of the maids, the lady decided to quietly hide behind the doorway, as she was very hungry. But when the maids began desperately searching for her, she realized that she had to run. Deciding not to waste a minute, she decided to run down the corridor in a blue dress, holding its fabric in her hands, and saying out loud that she would now taste some delicious food and fill her stomach with everything that was most satisfying. She would have continued running towards the kitchen or dining room if she hadn't heard very strange sounds, which made her turn around, not understanding who was making them and why they were so strange, but she wanted to know where they were coming from. The girl found herself in a spacious hall with a high ceiling and little furniture, which is why a female voice telling someone to be quiet sounded with a long echo, as if someone did not want to be noticed. Then, the main character decided to quietly sneak up to the room from where she heard suspicious noises, because she recognized in the quiet voice her stepmother, who for some reason was not at her husband's funeral. Seeing the shocking scene through the crack in the door, the red-eyed, golden-haired protagonist was so surprised that she continued to watch what was happening with her mouth open, not even trying to give herself away by breathing. The stepmother's lover turned out to be a butler named Ash, who had already touched his beloved's feet, and said that even though the right of inheritance and the inheritance itself would go to Belle when she came of age, they would marry her off to someone, and Karen's entire house would be theirs. The stepmother herself had already said with her lips that Belle had no brains at all, but she had an excellent figure thanks to which she would be able to find some kind of groom for her, because she had already won her trust. The protagonist of the story listened to all this through the doors, realizing that all these years she had only been deceiving her, and that she also wanted to force her to marry someone else in order to quickly get her home. The girl would have continued to stand and watch what was happening if one of the decorations had not fallen right from her dress, which made a loud ringing sound that could lead to her being discovered. The couple, the butler and stepmother, who were already on the bed and preparing to immerse themselves in pleasure, heard an incomprehensible noise and stopped what they were doing so that Ash could come out and see what was going on. But when he opened the door, he noticed only an empty corridor in light colors, in which there was clearly no one, which calmed him down. Although just a moment ago, the worried main character was hiding behind the same door. There were a lot of beautiful ornaments paintings and candle stands in the corridor, but there were no people there, which surprised Ash. But he had already decided that he had imagined it all, and he intended to return to his mistress. Meanwhile, Belle was running down the corridor from her stepmother's room with the butler as fast as she could, because she knew that all her affairs would go down the drain if she was even noticed out of the corner of an eye where she was. But she was still angry at her stepmother, because even such a seemingly kind person as she did not live up to her hopes. So she already wants to take revenge on her, or at least make sure that her plans for Belle do not come true. And as soon as she turned back for even a second, because of negative feelings, and turned her head back, she noticed with horror and surprise, next to her, the white-haired aristocrat from whom she had previously run away. She accidentally bumped into him, causing her to immediately turn away and cover her nose with her hand, as he had taken the full brunt of the impact, and it felt like he was about to break, while she herself lay on the floor, unable to stand on her feet. It seems the main character didn't fully understand who was in front of her, so she quickly turned her head towards the stranger, looked at him with indignation, and asked where he was going in such a hurry, unaware that they had already met before. Unlike the protagonist, the aristocrat Argos remained calm, because he looked at the heroine with indifference, but slightly embittered, showing off in front of her, in an expensive outfit, and saying that they met again, and it was not an accident. They met where a large wooden bookcase stood near the wall, and it was there that the main character looked at Argos in surprise and asked what he was doing there. The girl continued to lie on the floor, not understanding the situation, and Argos was also in no hurry to help her, which caused an awkward silence between them, as if they were shocked that they had met each other in such a place. Argos looked at the heroine with such disdain and frowning brows, as if he did not completely trust her, even in the case when the lady had not lied to him about uninvited guests and a setup about poison. However, remembering that the girl had not run away from her stepmother and butler's room for a decent distance, she quickly rose to her feet without anyone's help, continuing to run, even without the man's help wanting to hide as quickly as possible. But Argos would not let her escape this time either, so he quickly stood in front of the girl and roughly grabbed her wrist, which surprised the lady, greatly looking at him in shock, while the aristocrat's face continued to show indignation. That wasn't all, because the tall, white-haired man instantly pushed the girl against the wall, which Belle hit, as if he intended to ask her this time who she was, how she knew so much, and why she was behaving like that. The girl with golden hair was shaking with fear and nerves, and Argus could see it, but he still touched her chin with his fingers, asking where she was running away from him, while the lady looked at him with ruby eyes. The gentleman himself continued to look at her with frowning brows, waiting for an answer that the girl could not utter out of fear, and which is why he continued to peer into her deep eyes, hair and face. Then the main character imagined in her mind a bouquet of flowers on which her late father was lying with a white cloth over his face, realizing that people only have tiny moments when they can feel happiness. Having imagined a luxurious spacious hall with white statues, a long blue carpet, luxurious columns, and a center where the body of the deceased should lie, the girl realized that everything in her life was happening the same way, misfortune after misfortune, because right now she's trapped in the hands of the novel's true villain, who has her back against the wall and is demanding explanations while Belle reels from her father's death, her stepmother's betrayal, and the poison situation. She did not try to utter a word, but only opened her mouth slightly, either from surprise or from confusion. But fear was still visible in her eyes, as if Argos was about to deal with her in the same way as with the servants. And the aristocrat also remained silent, continuing to peer at the appearance of the main character with such a serious look in his red eyes that only because of this, the lady could not speak, afraid of doing something wrong. Then the girl decided to mentally ask Lolo why Argos showed up at her father's funeral if the novel clearly stated that his and her families had no connection, and the monster said that it was a matter of the rules of the world. Introducing Sill and Haley as bride and groom, Lolo explained that plots in the book that had nothing to do with the main characters would be omitted, but to maintain a logical connection, plot branches not written in the original could be introduced, which is why Argus appeared before her now. Imagining herself with a book and glasses, the main character asked Lolo in her mind whether this meant that Argus's appearance at the funeral in Karen's house was some kind of additional story, and the monster said with a smile that this was indeed the case. Having imagined in her head several ships with snow-white sails, the lady remembered that according to the plot, the ruling family, the Rassam family, and the Karen family set out on a voyage in order to expand the borders of the empire. Also, by imagining, for example, her father and the father of the white-haired aristocrat as descendants of Argus and Belle, and also by imagining an incredibly rich man between them, the protagonist realized that the families were very rich back then. Lolo told the main character all this, while she herself was in the blue backstage world, listening to his words about how, after the clans became poor and lost most of their money, they stopped communicating with the ruling family. Belle also looked at the indignant Argus, who put his hand on his belt, realizing that he was now acting as a condolence speaker on behalf of his family because he was at the funeral of his father's colleagues. Looking at the lady, who suddenly looked at him with a smirk, the man said that she should not test his patience, also calling her by name, but the girl only looked at him with a smile, surprised that he knew her name. But despite all her audacity, the lady still turned back, as if she was afraid of something, or of Argus himself, who stood in front of her and looked, saying that he knew not only her name, but also everything that happened at the banquet. Then he approached the main character again, and leaned her against the wall so close that the girl could only look at him and hope that the aristocrat did not have any bad thoughts about her. Argos began to speak, and said that he knew perfectly well that Heidi's older sister Sasha wanted to frame her sister, which is why she created a cunning plan in which two maids were supposed to give her a glass of poison, which is what the main character imagined. Having also imagined Belle drinking that very wine, the aristocrat continued the story, saying that an inexperienced maid had mixed up and served the glass to the wrong person, which is why she lost consciousness. Then, Belle, unconscious from the poison, was in his room when the maids brought her to Argus, leaning against her and turning around as if they knew they were doing the right thing, even though they had made a mistake. And now, standing in front of the confused blonde, the man ran his finger over her lips, clarifying that he was surprised that she could not have known this, although she herself was the person who saved him from shame. He also suddenly lowered his hand and moved it away from the wary heroine's face, saying that this was not the only thing that surprised him, because like her, there were many oddities in this situation that he wanted to clarify. Looking closely at the girl with red eyes that stood out against the backdrop of his pale skin and white hair, the man admitted that he clearly remembered how she woke up and said that Sasha was to blame for everything. The golden-haired lady herself continued to look at the aristocrat with crimson, frightened eyes, while he asked her how she guessed that it was his older sister Heidi who was involved in everything, and how she could have known that people with Sill would burst into his room, accuse him, and try to convict him. Hearing very firm, straightforward questions, the main character swallowed in fear as her forehead turned blue with anxiety, because she did not understand how to explain all this to the gentleman who was probably expecting the truth from her. While the girl did not know how to get out, they were already looking for her all over the palace, because earlier she ran away from everyone because she wanted to eat. But now 2 maids are running anxiously along the corridors and do not understand where she went. Then they decided to enter the very room where the stepmother and her lover had decided to retire, which is why the door to the chambers slowly opened and warm light poured from the corridor into the bedroom. They did not see them in an awkward position, because the butler had already hastily taken off his shirt, looking askance at the arriving maids, while the stepmother, on the contrary, was in a beautiful dress, as if she had not done anything indecent before. She walked out into the corridor in a blue dress, looking at the two ladies, and asking them why they were making so much noise on the day of the funeral. But they were already about to run in the other direction, saying that Belle was missing, and they were looking for her. With a sad and overly exaggerated sigh, the stepmother lowered her head and told the maids to immediately find Belle before the important funeral ceremony began, to which the two girls only bowed their heads and loudly said that they would carry out the order. It seems that the main character heard the voice of the maids from some part of the palace, which is why she moved, trying to loudly shout that she was here, but Argus did not allow her to do more, because he once again pressed her against the wall so hard. And suddenly, that Belle's already frightened eyes became even wider, and she continued to look at him, not trying to make any more sounds. With his lips slightly parted, the white-haired handsome man only told the girl not to make another sound if she didn't want to ask for trouble, also hissing at her, as if ordering her to be even quieter. He even looked the lady in the eyes so that she would clearly notice his anger and persistence, threatening that if he did not shut up right now, then today, instead of just her father, she would be buried with him. Only after this did the girl not dare to scream, but she wouldn't have done it anyway, because the guy covered her mouth with his dark hand, looking into his red eyes, and realizing that there was nowhere else to run. Meanwhile, everyone else was already intending to find Belle, as was her stepmother, who had only put her hand on her belt with a displeased face, saying to someone that this girl was completely ill-mannered if she didn't care about her father's funeral. A butler named Ash followed her step by step, clenching his fists, and telling Madame that she was still very young, and therefore did not understand the main thing, which is why she should not be trusted not only with the title, but also with Karen's house as a whole. Looking at his stepmother walking ahead with a frown, the butler Ash also added to his words that the house should be managed by a capable and experienced woman, meaning his stepmother, even though she cannot inherit it legally. In response to the butler's words, the lady only grabbed her head in the most demonstrative manner, saying that she didn't know how much longer she had to tolerate Belle and protect her if she had such a spirited character. There was some truth in the woman's words, because the girl, due to her courage and confidence, was afraid to move, while Argos covered her mouth, also looking into her eyes, as if wanting her to give in quickly. She only frowned deeply, with anger, realizing that her once dear stepmother, who loved her and told her fairy tales, now wanted not only to snatch the inheritance and title for herself, but also to directly take over the management of the estate. Seeing the lady's ambiguous behavior and her strange anger, the white-haired guy only smiled as his short, shiny locks covered his eyes as if he knew what was going on. Argus raised his head, and with a frowning face and the smile of a true villain, said that it seemed like her stepmother had a lot of plans for her, as if he was already planning to do something, or he was just laughing at the situation. The fact is that in order to inherit the title, one must appear before noble lords upon reaching the age of 18, as Papa Bell once did for this kneeling before an aristocrat. The most important person at the ceremony is the emperor with a red crown and gold decorations on his clothes, because it is he who will initiate the person into the aristocracy before pulling the sword out of its sheath. With his long blade, he must touch the shoulders of a future nobleman, like Belle's father, to deliver a ceremonial speech, after which he will be considered a count, and his entire family will have an inheritance and title. Immediately after this, the person receives a paper with the text and signature of the emperor, which is what Count Karen himself once received, placing the important sheet on the table, where there were also jewelry, a writing pen, and earrings. Then the lady imagined in her head not only herself, but also her young childish version, with whom she harmoniously touched hands, realizing that if the heir was still young, he could not properly rule the estate. The very next moment, imagining herself as a little girl in the hands of an embittered, treacherous stepmother, the lady realized that according to the law, in the case of the youth of the heir, the right to rule is transferred to the eldest in the family, and this is precisely the stepmother who intends to get all the wealth of her family as quickly as possible. Now the estate was not too loud. No one could find Belle, so the stepmother walked around the luxurious palace without a trace, also noticing a very suspicious room with a closed door at the end of the corridor. She immediately pointed her finger at it with displeasure, peering into the mysterious door at the end of the slightly dark corridor, and asking the servants whether they had checked everything there or had forgotten about this room altogether. The two girls who were constantly with the Countess and helped her look for Bella, or rather did all the work for her, only doubted her order, saying that the Count had ordered them never to enter that room. But the maid's words only angered the evil mistress even more, which is why she frowned, her thin eyebrows looking at the suspicious door that interested her with sparkling red amber eyes. She instantly turned to the girls, also looking at the one who dared to say such words to her, pointing her finger at her and shouting, like how can she say such things to her if she is now the mistress of this palace? Two friends in black and white worksuits were instantly startled by the elderly woman's voice, which caused them to jump up in their seats, constantly apologizing to her and saying that they would go there right away and check everything. Suddenly, behind the stepmother, there appeared the butler Ash, no less mysterious than the room itself, who only twirled his feet on the patterned carpet, telling the woman in a sly voice not to be angry, because they did not know this. Indecently, right in front of everyone, the treacherous servant crept up behind the stepmother and began to very delicately straighten her hair, which embarrassed the woman, and was even more embarrassed by his words, saying that her time had come, and the Count and Countess must leave. His face showed even greater anger, and a sly smile than that of the woman with whom he wanted to pierce his stepmother, looking into her eyes through glasses, and saying that now this whole house belongs to her, she just needs to wait. The butler's words only inspired the stepmother to become even more angry and make plans, which is why she looked sideways, saying that because of the Count, Belle would now have to pay her for the lost years. Unexpectedly, for the stepmother, the butler, as if he were her real husband and not her lover, grabbed her by the waist, while he himself stood behind her, as if intending to calm her down, to say something that would definitely stop her from being angry. It seemed that even the woman herself felt awkward in the butler's company, but he continued to hug her from behind, whispering in her ear that he would spend all his efforts to ensure that she would get this house. And while the couple consisting of the stepmother in a blue dress and the servant Ash hugged and understood that for their plan, they only needed to arrange Belle's wedding in the near future, they did not suspect that right behind the wall, the protagonist was also not alone, but in the company of the persistent Argus, who still insisted on answers and pressed her against the wall. But the stepmother didn't even suspect this, continuing to think only about her studies and touching her face, smiling and saying that this is really so, because all that is needed is to marry off Belle. The main character overheard the entire conversation, realizing that her stepmother was going to get rid of her by marrying her, which is why she angrily clenched her fists and clenched her teeth. Argos himself noticed all this, looking at Belle and listening to his stepmother's conversation behind the wall, after which he only said to the girl with a smile that it seemed like her life was not going well. The girl immediately shouted at him that he should immediately forget everything he had heard, because she understood that if they had a scandal on this basis, neither family would escape shame. But the dark-skinned man merely tilted his head to the side and said with a gloomy look that he would do as the girl asked him if she answered his previous question about how she knew everything. At that moment, the girl realized that she had returned to the problem she had been running away from, which made everything behind her seem to become darker and disappear. And she herself depicted excitement and silent shock on her face. Then the man in front of the girl folded his arms and began to stare intently at the heroine when she began to lie to him, saying that she had already overheard Lady Sasha's plan, and that her poisoning was just an accident and nothing more. But what was the lady's surprise when the white-haired handsome man didn't even ask her any questions? He only tilted her head and began to peer into her eyes, asking if that lady was her real mother. Because of this, the protagonist continued to look at him with her lips parted, wondering in her head how he could jump from topic to topic so quickly and why he was even interested in her family. Suddenly, he leaned even closer to the main character, very close, also touching her chin with his finger, saying that there used to be an unrivaled dancer who was popular among the aristocrats. She trembled when Argos touched her cheek, saying that not only was she very popular and beautiful, but she also allowed the main character to inherit her beauty, which is why he admires her now. But all this did not suit the girl, and she was not going to tolerate the bullying from the man and obey him. And it was for this reason that she sharply and forcefully pushed his palm away from her face, slapping it with great force. Looking at her companion with a stern, clear, and decisive gaze, the girl told him not to go too far with her, which caused Argos to quickly imagine next to the heroine's face her own mother, who had the same character. And the realization that Belle was so similar to her own mother struck the aristocrat so much that he opened his eyes wide, as if he had seen a miracle, continuing to peer at the lady as if she were a model of determination. The couple stood in the corridor with red curtains and continued to talk. Or rather, the lady suddenly fell silent, listening to the words of Argos, who was looking at her as if he would now give her advice, just as she had given it to him last night. Then the man very quickly approached the golden-haired girl and whispered in her ear something that greatly surprised and embarrassed her, namely that supposedly the most beautiful flowers are the first to perish at the hands of man. Leaving the lady with a bunch of questions, the man suddenly wanted to leave her and go further down the corridor, turning around with a smile and telling her to be careful, which made the girl blush, not understanding what was going on. She still didn't understand anything, but it was too late to ask the mystical guy with white hair questions because he was already moving very far away from her, and all she could do was watch him go and think about the situation. Time passed and gradually approached the moment when the girl had to go to the cemetery to say goodbye to her late father, surrounded by graves, a gray sky, and a modest, bright church. Even though the lady never met her father and never knew him because she was reincarnated into Belle's body very late, she still decided to put light pink flowers on his grave to honor his memory and show respect. She looked at the grave cross with peace, while dark clouds and wind reigned around her. And when behind her stood silently not only her stepmother in a dark dress, but also other people saying goodbye to the deceased. The lady had very different thoughts in her head, but when she looked at the Count's grave and said nothing, she simply thanked him for a second life, even if he did not know her, and she did not know him either. No one noticed it, but in the lady's eyes, in addition to sadness and kindness, there was also determination, a readiness for difficulties, because she looked ahead and promised the Count to protect all his possessions and not make him a laughingstock. Behind her stood the stepmother, supposedly saddened by the death of her husband, who looked sadly at her stepdaughter, who closed her eyes, telling her not to be sad about her father's death, since he had now gone to a better world. But the girl suddenly opened her eyes and seemed to want to look at her with shock, because unexpectedly for her, the woman behind her began to wipe away her tears with a handkerchief, saying that soon they would all go to the next world. And while Belle was thinking that she was very unhappy with her false emotions and grief, the stepmother herself continued to feign sadness, telling her not her own daughter that the person standing behind her wanted to see her. The stepmother had in mind a lady no less chic than herself, with bright pink hair, who appeared before the heroes with a fan, and a smile, also apologizing for arriving a little late. In her mind, the girl decided to ask Lolo who this woman was, to which the monster responded with an imaginary message, saying that this was Mrs. Catherine, the mother of a minor character named Georgie, and then she was horrified. Hearing the name, which was scary for her, the girl who had previously read the novel immediately understood that Catherine had made a lot of noise in aristocratic circles, but before that she was just a maid who in fact envied the aristocrat and his wife. The girl imagined in her mind the wife of the very aristocrat, for whom Catherine worked, realizing that it was she who had set her up in order to become the emperor's mistress and become his wife in the future. And so it happened, which is why Catherine quickly became the legal wife of the white-haired emperor, and then gave birth to an equally fair-haired heir, holding him in her arms with a very evil grin, mocking and dark. And gradually, she turned into a full-fledged empress, because she gained her value thanks to her grown-up son named Georgie, whom the heroine imagined near the sofa when the imperial couple themselves were sitting on it. Continuing to explain everything to the protagonist with messages in his head, Lolo seemed to be flying in the air with a board and saying that she had now come to the funeral on behalf of the emperor, and so there is an iron triangle, a connection between the families. But Lolo's words did not calm the main character, because she continued to look at everyone with apprehension, not understanding why the emperor himself allowed himself to be introduced to his mistress, especially at a funeral. And she was even more surprised when Lolo's voice in her head told her that Catherine had come here for her, which is why the lady lowered her head, trying to hide her emotions of bewilderment and internal shock from everyone. She didn't have much time, because Lady Catherine was already approaching her to talk, and the protagonist, trying to show that she was well-mannered and not hiding anything, raised her head and looked at her. The woman, smiling and touching the blonde's hand, said that she was very glad to see her, because the last time she met her was at the debut, but she was very glad that during this time she had only become more beautiful. Suddenly, the main character's stepmother intervened in the conversation, smiling and saying that Catherine was exaggerating because her beauty could not cope with her imperial appearance, and therefore she did not consider her a beauty. The red-haired elderly woman only picked up the topic of conversation, gesturing with her hand, and looking at her friend with a smile, telling her not to say such words in front of Belle, because everyone knows that beauty is first and foremost kindness. Everything around Belle seemed to turn gray. She didn't understand anything, continuing to listen to how the women humiliated her in front of her while she stood and couldn't move from shock and discontent. But the girl was pulled out of her deep thoughts of anger by her stepmother herself, who placed her hand on her shoulder, asking if she would like to marry the Marquis of Arundel, her son, which the lady was very surprised about. Imagining her evil stepmother in purple tones, the girl remembered that according to the laws, an aristocrat who married before inheriting her title automatically lost all inheritance and status. Having also introduced Catherine, the protagonist realized that they had both planned everything very well, since they both wanted her to marry Georgie, thanks to which her son would have more territories, and they would have connections. Also remembering the appearance of Catherine's son, named Georgie, the girl understands that according to the plot, the emperor's illegitimate son was originally killed by the main character, that is Sill, for treason. Having more accurately imagined his appearance, white hair and blue eyes, the girl realized that she did not want such a fate for herself, and therefore did not even intend to be his wife, so that others would only benefit from it. But suddenly, Catherine, still smiling, pulled out a letter from somewhere saying that it was an invitation to a banquet on the occasion of His Majesty's birthday, and she was subtly hinting that Belle would have just the chance to meet her son. The girl took the invitation in her hands, but did so with such a dissatisfied, angry face that it was clear to everyone that she was already extremely outraged by the whole situation, and regretted that Catherine had even approached them. At that moment, the main character seemed to be faced with a virtual choice between the worlds, in the form of a blue message, which she looked at wearing a black dress, wondering whether she should go to the banquet after all. She thought for a long time, because she clearly remembered the previous mission, during which Argus grabbed her by the throat and almost killed her, and therefore there was no emotion on her face, and she nervously tried to make sense of everything. Two virtual transparent buttons appeared in front of her face, indicating that she was now either accepting the task or refusing it, but the girl looked at them doubtfully, already preparing her index finger to press. And in the end, the lady chose the button that would help her refuse the banquet, because she doesn't want to go to it anyway, just to marry George, thereby pleasing everyone but herself. But imagine her surprise when her button was never pressed, because two more messages appeared in front of her, saying that the system would now make a choice for her, and this infuriated the heroine. She was even more amazed when Lolo suddenly appeared in front of her and began to spin in the air with joy, informing her that she would still have to go to the banquet in order to appear before the main character under the name of Sill. The lady was so shocked that she couldn't even move, and so she continued to stand in the imaginary mathematical world with an agitated face, a fake smile, and empty eyes wide with surprise, not understanding why everything was once again not happening the way she wanted it to. Meanwhile, Count Karen's funeral had already ended, causing all the people and dignitaries who were at the cemetery to go about their business, once again leaving the tombstones, statues, and gardens to stand alone. Having imagined a great many people dressed in elaborate outfits, the main character realized that the banquet in honor of the emperor's birthday would be in just a week, and that there would be a great many guests there, including the most important and worthy ones. Also, imagining in her head her own evil stepmother, who plays chess and has an incredibly evil smile, The girl realized that it would be she who would try to arrange a date for her with Catherine's son so that they could get married as soon as possible. But the lady also imagined herself at the chessboard as if playing against Lolo himself, who ordered her to confess to Sill, which is why she saw on the board not the usual figures, but herself, the main character, and George. The problem was quite big for the girl, so she imagined chess pieces in the form of Sill and George in front of her, not understanding what would await her at the banquet if the two guys started a confrontation. She even grabbed her head, not understanding what she had done wrong, and why the system had decided to call her that, because she had not intended to do anything bad, but wanted to turn her own destiny in the right direction. But time passed, and the next day arrived so quickly, clearer, more joyful and sunny than the previous one, because the blue sky only decorated the estate of Count Karen, where the main character lived. While in her room, she was minding her own business, namely sitting at the table and holding a piece of paper in her hand, which she was reading. But when she heard knocks at the door, she turned her head and ordered someone to come in. After the command, two maids entered the beauty's ass without saying a word, carrying in their hands a large white thing that looked like stacks of papers, as if they were intended especially for Belle. Once again, without any questions, they threw not only stacks of papers, but also books with dark covers onto the main character's table, which caused a writing pen to fall after them, which was about to fall to the floor. Following the maids, the butler Ash appeared before Belle, who was in fact the stepmother's lover. But now he was playing the role of a good man, because he bowed to the heroine and told her to check all these territorial accounts, down to the last piece of paper. The lady looked at the huge stack of books and papers fastened together in great surprise, intimidated by the upcoming work, and asking the butler if she really needed to look at all of this and check it manually. In fact, the golden-haired main character only smiled slyly, because according to the butler, these bills are only for this year, and he will also bring for the last 3. But Belle understands perfectly well that this is a scam from her stepmother. The girl smiles like that for the reason that no one even suspects that in a past life she was a real workaholic who could sit at the computer for hours and type until she fell to the floor from fatigue. It was for this reason that Belle, when the golden sun began to shine on her, only gave the butler her good smile, ordering him to go and promising that she would finish everything very soon. Immediately after this, the lady set to work, causing each sheet of paper to literally fly up from the speed of the girl who sat at the table and patiently read each of them, continuing to think about the inheritance of the title. She looked at the document with an indifferent face and read it, remembering that if someone wanted to quickly inherit the title, then it was necessary to bring gifts to the emperor, which is what she should do. She imagined that same emperor in burgundy clothes and with a crown on his head, realizing that this could be the only way out of the situation, since her affairs were not going well now, and she could lose everything that her father had. Belle already had a pen in her hand and wrote something on the document, with a gloomy face, realizing that Karen's territory was currently in trouble, and besides the estate belonged to her stepmother, and there were also problems with money. She also remembered Lolo, who flew around her, although in reality he was only interested in the cookies on the serving table, which he stole from her with great pleasure rolling around on the bed. Unable to bear it, the blonde girl decided to go up to Lolo and drop everything she was doing, grab the monster, and began to angrily crush him, and say that she was currently in trouble, and that he was irritating her with his indifferent food. A small living ball with a tail and wings touched its cheeks in pain, telling the aristocrat not to be so nervous, because if she always thinks about failure, she will not achieve victory, and it is very big there. As soon as Lolo started talking about something positive, the main character immediately became happy and looked at him with sparkling eyes, holding the sheets of paper in her hand, and asking him what surprise awaits her. Then the monster explained to her that after she completed the task, her jet would open a shop where she could exchange items, but for now it was locked, which the lady imagined, also imagining a message about it. The girl's crimson eyes became even brighter and more intense as she continued to look at Lolo and hold the papers, telling him that it sounded very promising and that she really liked it. But no matter how strong the heroine's joy was, she remembered Sill and Argus, whom she needed to meet, imagining them as a dragon and a bear, and realizing that they were the strongest characters in the novel and that this scared her. And when the girl asked Lolo if it would be okay if she confessed to him, the monster presented a hierarchy of characters, with Sill and Heidi at the top, explaining that they would be together, and she was just a passerby. Also imagining a trash can in which unnecessary characters are scattered like dolls. Lolo began to explain that other characters are responsible for development here, and many of them leave the stage after a few appearances because they are no longer needed. Again, recalling his friend named Belle, Lolo explained that in this world, she is a simple doll with blonde hair who was resurrected as a passerby and has no value in the plot. But suddenly, the little monster imagined how the Belle doll gets into the portal, while she herself said that despite the fact that she is not important, she was the first one to come out as if with a bug to go beyond the boundaries of history. He also presented his mistress in a chic dress, who seemed to be climbing beyond the boundaries of the film, and its lines intending not to obey even the plot, which is why Lolo considers her to be out of bounds, wrong in the world. Lolo himself was floating in the air, telling the girl everything and briefly telling her that because of this, the characters that were not out of control of the narrative itself could no longer leave her, and that was why she could consider herself safe. Hearing this, the lady with crimson eyes opened her eyes very wide in surprise, saying that this was amazing news that calmed her down and that it needed to be said as soon as possible. She decided to slowly walk up to the white window and look at the view from it, thinking about Lolo's words, and coming to the conclusion that neither the main villain Argos nor the main hero Sill would be able to harm her. She also wanted to slowly open it with a thoughtful face, realizing that she should not be afraid of simple characters, but of those who are out of control, such as her stepmother, who wants to eliminate her and force her into marriage. This news only made her enjoy life and the view from the window, which is why she looked at the world with a smile, realizing that the plot murder did not work on her, but now she just needs to deal with her stepmother. Gradually, she got down to work and picked up one piece of paper after another, examining each one and thinking about what gift she needed to give the emperor to win his title. But suddenly, someone appeared in the room. It turned out to be a cute maid with short hair who came to her to inform her about the arrival of the eldest son of the Rossum family, who was already waiting for her for a personal conversation, according to the maid. The golden-haired beauty's face immediately showed confusion and wariness. She even dropped the piece of paper from her hand, realizing that the eldest son of the Rossum family was Argos, but she couldn't figure out why he was here. Meanwhile, the uninvited guest was already in my living room, where there was a cabinet with a bunch of books, a nightstand with candles, where there was nice dark wallpaper and a large painting on the wall. Without a second's hesitation, the girl in the light dress immediately opened the doors of the guest room, thereby causing light to appear behind her, making it look as if Belle, like an angel, had descended from heaven. The first thing she did was bow to her guest, curtsying like a true aristocrat, allowing the man to unsee her sky-blue dress, which perfectly matched her golden hair. But judging by the reaction of the guy himself, who continued to sit on the couch and only slightly glance at the heroine, this did not surprise him much, because she did not even say a word, turning her head to the side. He remained motionless, crossing his legs, and looking intently at the lady who warned him that if he wanted to see her, it was etiquette to first write her a letter of permission. Belle herself sat down opposite him, not afraid to make a remark to the one who had threatened to finish her off days ago. But she was not going to tolerate his behavior, because she herself was a person with a strong character who did not tolerate anything. In response to the heroine's words, Argos only picked up a cup of tea and began to drink it slowly, saying that there was actually nothing wrong with it since she should not accept him as a guest. While a drop of cold sweat was running down the main character's face, she continued to look at him, asking what brought him here then, and why he decided to talk to her, which, to put it mildly, surprised her. And while Belle was thinking that her estate was not a monument to come to it without asking, much less behave so rudely. But while she was waiting for an answer from Argus, she realized that he was only silent, creating awkwardness. Only then did the gray-haired guy raise his amazing red eyes to the girl, placing his palm on her chest, decorated with incredible stones, and saying that he just wanted to repay her for the service. But the aristocrat's words surprised the girl even more than his appearance in general, causing her to suddenly raise her head and look at him with restrained shock, angry eyebrows, and rounded eyes. They continued to sit in the bright living room, which also had a blue wall with miniature lamps and a low window near which the couple sat, when Argus said that, although she told him that it was all an accident, she really helped him out that night. He told the girl that without any doubt, continuing to sit quietly, crossing his legs, but no longer holding in his hands the cup of tea that the maids had treated him to earlier while he was waiting for the main character to arrive. Pozniaruku, he suddenly snapped his fingers and told the girl calmly that he did not like to be in debt to anyone, so he had prepared a special gift for the lady which he ordered her to bring. At the aristocrat's command, a red-haired servant with the same red clothes immediately went to him, silently, carrying in his hands a certain blue box in which something unusual was located. Belle also immediately turned to the servant, not understanding anything yet, so she only looked at the man with her lips slightly open, intending to see what Argus had prepared for her in that light blue box. The heroine remembered in her head that according to the plot, Argus, in order to capture the emperor's attention, received the main chambers of commerce and conducted business not only in the empire, but also beyond its borders, which is why she imagined him with a coin. She understood that Argus was very rich, and therefore the gift would not be cheap. But when she opened the box, she saw a bottle with a golden bow attached to its red fabric, which was clearly valuable. The girl smiled sweetly, realizing that all her thoughts were correct, and the gentleman really decided to pamper her with something unusual. But so far, she does not fully understand the meaning of this thing, even though it is very beautiful. It seems that Argus expected a different reaction from the heroine, or perhaps he did not see her smile, which is why he looked at her with indifference and calm, asking her to her face if she liked the gift from him. It turned out that the lady did not want to show her positive emotions to the gentleman, or to thank the man for the hotel, because she continued to remain silent, looking at the box in complete silence, from which everyone's soul trembled. Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, she stood up from her seat and looked angrily at Argos, shouting whether he was mocking her, which made everything around her seem to disappear and become darker, and she intended to express her complaints and all her indignation to him. But the aristocrat sat in his place, folded his arms, and telling the lady that it was honey, also once again clarifying whether she liked his gift, as if the enraged heroine would calm down and answer him in a normal, polite tone. Argus looked at the lady and couldn't understand why she was silent, standing right in front of him, while his own eyes were turning white from the awkward moment, and the girl with golden hair was not going to thank him. She only gracefully adjusted her hair from her face, continuing to look at the gentleman with crimson, angry eyes, and telling him to leave here immediately if he decided to come here only for fun and mockery. This surprised Argus greatly, so he continued to look at her with bewilderment, asking himself in his head what was going on with this girl, and why he had displeased her by bringing honey in a beautiful box with a golden bottle. Very interesting events were taking place at Count Karen's estate, developing with inexorable speed, but no less interesting were the events that took place in the house of Duke Rassam on the evening of the previous day. Duke Argus Rassam sat at his desk, as usual, holding a writing pen in his hand, writing letters, and signing documents, with the gloomy expression he always had, even without anyone being present. After a while, a butler appeared before him and read him a report from a sheet of paper saying that the investigation had been completed and that it had been revealed that Count Karen, although neglecting his duties, had secretly sent money to his relatives. Argus, with his eyes downcast, listened attentively to the butler's words, saying that Count Karen still defended him as the next ruler. But in the Duke's own mind, this meant that it seemed he had persuaded the heroine to help him. He asked his servant about this, asking if Belle's father could have asked his daughter to help him that night, thereby saving him from the shame that other people who hated him so much wanted to pour out on him. Then the man began to sort through the papers, saying that Sasha had then decided to lie in order to simply break off her sister's relationship with Sill, which the butler listened to, looking at his master. The butler decided to approach the Duke closer and whisper in his ear that he had heard a rumor that Karen's daughter was having problems with the inheritance and needed a gift for the emperor to appease him, while Argos himself looked at the documents. With a graceful gesture of his hand, the white-haired gentleman told the butler that since she was the daughter of his supporter, he would help her, thereby bringing her a precious gift that would please the emperor. But now Argos sits in front of the lady with a frowning face, because he is dissatisfied with the heroine's reaction, realizing that he just wanted to repay her for his father's kindness, and she yells at him and says that he is mocking her. He sat and didn't say a word, continuing to look at the blonde with a frowning gaze, realizing that they wanted to kick him out, for the fact that he had simply brought her a useful gift, repaid her a debt. Already in the backstage world, the main character pointed at the images of Argos and space with her finger when she looked at Lolo and asked him if this gentleman wanted to ridicule her for her poverty in front of everyone. But the monster only informed her with white tablets of information that this world was very different from the one she lived in, because there were no spices here, and sweets were made with honey. The girl immediately leaned back from the information that was shocking to her, asking Lolo how this could be, also looking at him with truly shocking eyes, as if she did not expect to hear this. Then Lolo imagined in his head real honey with bees flowing into a jar, explaining to the main character that in this story honey is a real treasure, which is even passed down as an inheritance among the nobility. Having also imagined one lord covered in sword and blood standing among the dead aristocrats, the monster said that everyone was even ready to fight for a jar of honey because it was much more precious than stones. Lolo also looked at the box with the golden bottle inside, telling the protagonist that for such a gift, which was now before her eyes, anyone would be awarded a title, which meant that she should not miss this chance under any circumstances. As soon as Lolo finished his story and returned the main character to the present, the tall Argos in dark robes suddenly stood up from his seat, angrily, saying that he realized that the lady did not appreciate his gift. With his lips parted, the broad-chested man briefly said to the golden-haired girl that he was saying goodbye to her and apologizing for his impudent visit, also ordering the servant to immediately collect all of his things. Belle herself realized too late that it was precisely that box of honey that would definitely help her get the title, and that's why she became excited, also getting up from her seat and extending her hand to Argus, asking him to stop. But even she couldn't foresee that her careless actions would lead to her rather high heels getting caught in the carpet in a very bad way, causing her to quickly lose her balance and start to fall. Her excitement and haste caused the golden-haired beauty to fall quickly, causing her to scream in fear of falling, shouting obscene words, and falling straight towards the departing gentleman. The fall happened, and she expected to feel pain, at least in her legs or knees. But she did not feel even the slightest discomfort, which is why she slowly opened her eyes, intending to see the result of her clumsiness. Imagine her surprise when she raised her head and realized that she had fallen right on top of Argus himself, who was looking at her with bewilderment and anger, asking how he was supposed to understand this and what had happened. He looked intently into the girl's eyes, with red eyes, not looking away, not even blushing, only frowning with seriousness, constantly asking if the lady wanted to let him go so much that she was ready to throw him to the floor. The Duke's words and the awkward situation itself caused the story's protagonist to instantly blush with embarrassment, causing her cheeks to turn pink and her eyes to look in shock at the serious and completely unsurprised Argus. And while the main character couldn't recover from the shock and awkwardness, her stepmother wasn't sitting idle either, because at exactly the same time, somewhere in the chambers, she forced the maid to fall on her knees before her for daring to say something to her. Next to the stepmother also stood the butler, who looked attentively at the maid, who said that it was the absolute truth that Mr. Rossum had just given Belle a jar of honey, while the woman in the blue dress waved her fan. She was trembling with fear, although she had come to Belle earlier in the day and told her about the guest, but now she feared for her life, saying with pitiful eyes that Mrs. Belle intended to present honey to the emperor in order to receive a title. The girl's truthful words only angered the stepmother even more, which is why she folded her fan and looked angrily ahead, saying that she still underestimated her stepdaughter, who was now so disgusting to her. Having also imagined Duke Rassam with white hair, a chic outfit, and a rough look, the stepmother also asked everyone present when this careless lady decided to spend the night with Argus and win his attention. Butler Ash turned to his mistress and addressed her formally, asking if she had made a mistake in allowing Belle to see Argus at the time of the funeral somewhere in the estate. having imagined the main character's real mother, a dancer in red, and also having imagined Belle herself, the stepmother, only tisked with displeasure, saying that this girl had managed to seduce the Duke, and he hated women with all his heart. She lowered her head, dissatisfied and angry, saying out loud through her teeth that the Rassam family was really bothering her, but no matter how much she wanted to, she couldn't get rid of them, even if she really wanted to. But unlike his stepmother, Ash smiled and didn't worry, looking at his mistress, and saying that the Emperor's birthday was still far away. But he also had an idea in his head that they could pull off. And so that extra ears in the form of a maid would not hear the servant's insidious plan. The butler leaned over to the stepmother and whispered his idea to her, while the woman herself listened attentively, continuing to sit in the chair like a queen. The short-haired girl was left to sit on her knees in front of the noble people in surprise and fear not understanding what he was talking about, but she only heard that her stepmother laughed, telling her lover that his decision was excellent. Suddenly, the cunning woman came very close to the frightened maid and ordered her to go immediately to Belle to tell her that tomorrow they would arrange an inspection of their territories, where she would teach her how to manage everything. The maid did so, and then the time flew by, and the next day arrived bathing Karen's estate in green and blue colors, while inside the house, Belle was already preparing to appear before her stepmother. She decided not to keep the woman waiting, so she appeared before her, not only with a sweet face and luxurious hair, but also with a red dress, making her look like a real noble girl. Seeing her mother, the main character, decided to curtsy to her with a smile, as if she respected her, but continued to portray only feigned kindness, innocence, and stupidity. And Belle, in turn, continuing to play the role of a seemingly stupid and unsuspecting chicken, only smiled at her. Stepmother became embarrassed, covered her face with her hand, and thanked her for the compliments. Pointing her fan at the window, Mother immediately said that today she would be inspecting her property for the first time, but she would not be able to accompany her due to business, so a foreman that is an escort would go with her. It turned out to be the butler Ash, who immediately bowed to the ladies and placed his hand on his chest, telling Belle not to worry because he would accompany her and protect her from anything that would threaten her health and reputation. Without wasting any time, Belle quickly left the large snow-white room because she opened the door and went out into the street, already disappearing from sight, but saying goodbye to her stepmother and telling her that they would see each other again. But it turned out that the mother didn't have any important business, which is why she looked at Belle's carriage from the balcony in which the protagonist was about to leave, glad that she had finally sent her away from this house. Placing her hand on the stone railing of the balcony, with a beautiful miniature ring, with a red stone visible on her finger, the woman only realized with a smile that the fun was just beginning and she was enjoying it. She looked at the carriage with a stern, angry face, while she ordered the two maids standing next to her to immediately search Miss Belle's room so thoroughly that they would examine every inch of it and not miss anything. She also raised her upper lip in displeasure, thinking that the main character was very ridiculous and pathetic if she decided to achieve a title with some jar of honey that she wanted to present to a rich emperor. The woman clutched her stomach with her hand and continued to speak negatively about her stepdaughter, thinking that this entire estate would still belong not only to her, but also to the child in her belly, which she had already managed to create. Meanwhile, the main character was already recalling the map of her area, recalling that the territory of Gnas is located to the north of the empire, and this is a separate city that she imagined on the yellowish map. Her green carriage was already crossing a high stone wall, preparing to see at any moment a small settlement inhabited by very few people, in which it was constantly cold. And because of this, there were no traders. The girl, while in the carriage, looked at the small market, where there were many old people and children, women and men, remembering that there was not much work here. Therefore, everyone was poor, and the taxes from this settlement were small. She pushed aside the curtains with her hands and looked at everyone with regret, realizing that it was precisely because of the high taxes that all the inhabitants of this settlement were starving and becoming poor. And because of this, she was very sad to see them in simple clothes, even without food. When the carriage stopped, the main character, wearing a red dress, got out and began to look at the houses, thinking that if the population was large, it would be difficult to look after them, which meant she needed to come up with something for the long term. Her large crimson eyes were curious about everything as she continued to walk through the streets and look at everything, continuing to think about what conclusions she could draw from the reports she was working with. But suddenly, the main character's thoughts were interrupted by strange noises that she noticed nearby, and which were made by a young guy with blue hair because he was shouting at an old woman selling something in a basket. Unable to bear it any longer, the young man decided to abruptly and boldly knock over the elderly saleswoman's basket, causing the red beets that the woman wanted to sell to earn at least a coin to fall off. She was never able to make a profit because a young man with blue hair was shouting at her, pointing at her, and saying that this was his place to trade, while people were already looking at him in surprise. It was clear from the old woman that she was seriously scared, crawling away from the guy and throwing down her beets, saying that she apologized for everything because her granddaughter was sick and she urgently needed money for medicine. But the blue-haired guy didn't care about the old woman's problems because he only looked at her with a smile, also angrily saying, "Let her granddaughter die if this is her fate, and he doesn't want to see her anymore." In the end, the old woman was already talking with fear that she was leaving, and the young man continued to shout at her, saying that she should sell something valuable and not beets, which were in abundance in the settlement and which no one needed. But suddenly, the main character in red approached them and ordered everyone to stop immediately, only on command, which caused both the old woman on the ground and the blue-haired hooligan to immediately stare at her. This was also noticed by the butler, who had sworn to protect Belle at any cost, and who, upon seeing that the lady had decided to get involved with simple villagers, was immediately astonished and began shouting her name so that she would stop everything. But imagine his surprise when the girl not only ignored his words, but walked past, hinting that no one would stop her, and that she would still go and find out why the ill-mannered commoner was yelling at the woman. She instantly appeared in front of the granny and picked up her beetroot in her hands, smiling and saying that it would help her, and also hinting that she didn't need to worry when she was around. The simple old lady in brown clothes stood up and thanked Mistress Belle for her help, with a smile also touching her hands, which was very sweet from the outside, as they both stood surrounded by village houses. But that was not all, because the blonde gave her grandmother not only her smile, but also kindness, telling her that she wanted to buy all the beets from her, which surprised the old woman, very much asking again several times. Seeing this, the butler, whose name was Ash, was even more surprised, looking at the lady and shouting to her that noble people should not eat this beetroot because it might not only be bad, but also poisoned. But in response to this, the blonde with crimson eyes only turned to Ash with a blank look, saying that only she would be the one ordering anyone around here, and all he needed to do was remain silent unless asked. Immediately after this, Belle handed the beet seller 1 gold coin, which the grandmother immediately placed in her palm, while extending her hand with such a tremor as if she still had not calmed down from the attack. It turns out the beets weren't worth a single real gold coin, which is why the surprised old woman immediately ordered it, saying she wouldn't even have change. But Belle only smiled, saying she didn't need the rest. At that moment, the girl also imagined Lolo in her head, who crossed his arms in displeasure, saying through messages that even if she was trying to please others, her position was still precarious. But the calm and kind heroine behind the scenes of the world responded to this by saying that she hadn't helped him for nothing, because she remembered that, as he had said in this world, the only way to get sweets was honey, which was more valuable than gold, which she showed. The girl also imagined fields of greenery, telling Lolo that in this settlement, named Nyas, other crops could not be grown, but beets grew very well, which she bought. And while Lolo didn't understand why the main character spent so much money on beets, she explained to him, using an imaginary diagram, that no one knew that beets could be used to make sugar, which would certainly be very valuable. The lady with a smile folded her arms and realized that she had finally found a way to develop the economy of not only this settlement, but the entire Karen County, which would definitely earn her the title and the estate. But it turns out that the loud conversation between the main character and the saleswoman was being observed by someone who was up above, had hidden clothes, and only remained silent, listening to how Belle said goodbye to the old woman. The same man watching the main character unnoticed by everyone stands on the bridge that connects 2 houses together when another stranger was also standing near him. The mysterious person also had a hidden blue hood on his head, but his lips were still visible, with which he spoke to someone saying that this was the same one who escaped from the chambers of the Duke of Argos at night. It seems the main character couldn't help but notice the gazes of others, which is why she suddenly looked down, but with such a bluish tint on her face, as if she felt something bad, unfriendly, and suspicious. And Lolo noticed a strange change in the main character's mood, which is why he mentally asked her in bewilderment what had happened, not even realizing that someone was watching his mistress. As soon as the protagonist of the story looked at the place from which she felt strange premonitions, she noticed that there was no one else there, although she could have sworn that she felt someone else's eyes on her. And while the main character was telling Lolo that she thought she saw someone looking at her, the one who was actually watching her was already in a brown carriage nearby, in which he was talking about what happened that night. The unidentified man took off his cloak because he no longer needed it, pondering the servant's question, whether they should ask the girl for proof about the night she was with Argos. It turns out that behind the mysterious mask was the main character of the novel in which Belle was reborn under the name of Sill, who has purple hair and who indifferently ordered the servant not to do anything unnecessary, especially this. He leaned against something looking at the floor and telling his interlocutor that Duke Argus had already provided him with enough evidence that Sasha had set this all up to frame Heidi. And while he was saying that it was 90% true in his head, he could not forget the wonderful image of Belle in a red dress, who was charming not only externally, but also internally with her kindness. That's why he still sat with his head down and realized with a sad look that he didn't even want to hold this beautiful girl responsible for anything, because he was sure that she was not guilty. Meanwhile, the story's main character had already safely arrived home, which is why the green carriage stopped right next to the estate, so that the butler could then help the lady in the red dress out. This is what he did, extending his hand to the lady and informing her that they had already arrived, while the girl herself, it seemed, was not so joyful, but only remained silent, as if she had something deeply to think about. The butler obediently held her hand and helped her down, but Belle's head was still down because she was constantly thinking about her own thing, that is about the fact that the situation with the territories was now clear to her. She intended to walk resolutely towards the estate, step by step, getting closer to it, while Ash walked silently behind her, and while she thought about the village itself, which could actually get rich from beets. Belle remembered what she had seen there, namely the market with all sorts of taverns, realizing that there were still some clothing and shoe stores there, even if they weren't the most luxurious and expensive ones. The main character also recalled the food in that settlement, which she had been able to unsee on the street, recalling that there were a lot of fruits and vegetables, black bread and ale, and that she had noticed all of this earlier. But also having imagined chicken meso and vegetables at the top of her imagination, the girl realized that since the settlement is located inland and does not border the sea, there are no sailors there, which she imagined below. Raising her hand to her face, the blonde looked away and realized that if she wanted to really develop the settlement's economy, she needed to try to come up with more business ideas. So she entered the estate with unwavering determination, where she was immediately greeted by two maids behind her, but she herself glared angrily at the one who was right in front of her. The thing is that she didn't look at anyone, because she was surprised by her mother's absence, which is why she turned to one of the maids asking where she was, but the maid couldn't say anything because of her stutterings. Unexpectedly, for everyone right in front of the stunned main character, the stepmother, with screams and threats, threw one of the maids so hard that she fell to the floor and did not rise again, while the other one was trembling and afraid, and the heroine was in shock. The brown-haired girl, having seen the blonde, immediately rose to her knees and stood before Belle, begging her with pitiful eyes to save her from her stepmother, who could even kill them for the slightest disobedience. Suddenly, the stepmother herself appeared, with a fan and a sly smile when the servants were already circling around her, and when she looked at Belle, welcoming her into the house as if nothing had happened and saying that she was glad to see her. But Belle looked at her with frowning eyes, sternly asking what was going on and what had happened, intending to angrily find out everything she had been doing during her absence. And while the main character looked at the victim and tried to help her, the stepmother cast an angry glance at her, saying that she dared to search her room, although she had previously ordered them to search everything. Upon hearing the accusations, the maid who had fallen on the floor immediately pointed her finger at the eldest of them, saying that it was she who had ordered her to go in there and supposedly change the sheets, so that later all the blame could be placed on her. But this greatly angered the already strict stepmother, who looked at the victim with clenched teeth and furious eyes, ordering the others to immediately throw her into prison if she still dared to justify herself. And this was not destined to happen, because the chaos was immediately stopped by the main character herself, who raised her hand and immediately asked everyone to be silent because she wanted to say something. She, unlike everyone else, continued to be sweet and polite, and therefore even smiled at her stepmother, asking her with a smile if she could jump and tell what the maid had stolen if she said that she was a thief. In response, the stepmother also began to gesture with her hand, telling the lady that the maid had tried to steal from her the jar of honey that Argos had previously given her. But she need not worry since she had already found it and hidden it in a safe place. But as Belle had guessed, she realized that it was her stepmother who was involved in all of this, so she didn't even believe her, making her face more serious and realizing that she probably hid the honey only for personal use. She only bowed to her stepmother and thanked her, but she already understood that she was taken out of the house only to search the room and find honey, and then blame the maid for everything, saying that it was all her fault. Realizing how insidious a person could be, even the closest one, she frowned as hard as she could, not from anger, but from laughter, preparing to take revenge on her stepmother for all her atrocities. Meanwhile, the maid on the floor continued to look at Belle, with tears, saying that if she had been set up since she had taken care of her since childhood, she would never have dared to steal anything, especially something so valuable. But unexpectedly, for everyone, the main one decided to just go up to the stepmother, looking at the maid and asking her what she would do with her. And to this, the woman in the blue dress said, "Of course she will cut off her hands to teach others a lesson." Taking her stepmother's hand in her own, the blonde looked at her with a smile and said that the honey was her thing, and therefore she should come up with a punishment for the offender, which surprised the woman very much. She continued to gain her stepmother's trust, patting her on the shoulders and saying that she herself had taught her to be independent, and that was why she wanted to do everything herself. But her mother doubted her words. As a result, the aristocratic women looked at the maid on the floor with disgust, while the stepmother said that she was right, because she should not show mercy to someone who intended to steal her things. After this, the stepmother was about to leave the room, leaving the main character alone with the maid, and truly believing that the protagonist would actually punish the maid who was not guilty of anything. The maid herself was very scared that Belle's words in the conversation with her mother turned out to be true. That's why she was afraid of her. But suddenly, the heroine stretched out her hands to her, ordering her to stand up in order to talk normally. As soon as the maid stood up, she said that she had not really stolen anything from her. But Belle, with golden hair, only touched her cheek with her palm and said that she took her word for it and therefore would not punish her. She just turned back and took a few steps away from her, saying that from today, she was leaving the mansion, to which the maid asked if she was really driving her away from here. The girl was on the verge of tears, but she held back, looking sadly at the lady with crimson eyes and telling her that she really hadn't stolen anything, and if she didn't believe her, she could swear to her on her life. But suddenly, the blonde turned to her and, looking at her, said that she wasn't ordering her to leave just because she didn't believe her, but was ordering her to leave the mansion so that she would no longer be the center of attention. Belle even turned to her and whispered in her ear that first she became quiet, and then the maid should become quiet too, which she should understand before it was too late. Then the girl resolutely put her fist on her chest, continuing to look at her and say how she would leave if she was in danger. But Belle only waved her hand with closed eyes, saying that she was confident in herself. Lolo also suddenly appeared next to her and asked if she really wanted to kick out the one who had served under her mother. But the blonde indifferently said that there was no time and everything would only get worse. She looked up and made a very angry, spiteful look, not understanding why her stepmother chose her as a victim out of all the maids. But when she received the title, there would be big changes among the servants. Suddenly, the main character remembered that she was not the main character in the novel, which led her to imagine Heidi surrounded by guys who clearly had a great reputation, realizing that she probably had fewer problems now. That's why the girl thought with her hand on her chin, realizing that if she were reborn as the main character in the novel, she might not have any problems at all and wouldn't have to think through every step. And while things were turning out in favor of the main character at Karen's estate, while the stepmother herself was unaware of it, something interesting was also happening at Heidi's family estate, while the sky was bright above their house. The thing is that there were maids standing right in front of one of the rooms in the palace, but they were very scared when Sasha's joyful voice was heard from the room ordering everyone to leave immediately. Sasha was so angry that she threw her jewelry boxes at everyone, which scattered on the floor, while the girl herself screamed at everyone, asking everyone to leave her and not show up. The servants observed all this more than once a day, which is why they were now even afraid to look at Sasha, when, for example, her mother came out of her room in different clothes, while everyone around her bowed their heads. Sasha was sometimes angry, sometimes indifferent to everyone, and that's why this time her mother didn't even look at the maids, simply motioning for them to leave immediately so that she wouldn't even see anyone while they obediently obeyed her instructions. Sasha's mother, wearing a chic dress, entered her angry daughter's room, stepping over scattered jewelry and boxes, and already asking the ill-mannered slut why she had become so angry so often since her sister's return. It was with this question that Sasha's mother appeared before her and looked at her with the utmost animosity, clarifying what she didn't like and why others were forced to tolerate her rudeness. The young girl in the pink dress just looked at her mother with displeasure, asking why her father brought Haley here, because she was fine outside the city in a remote village, and now she was forced to endure her. She even clenched her teeth, telling her mother that if it weren't for her, she wouldn't have quarreled with Sill, whom she liked so much, and her father wouldn't have locked her in the room as a punishment. In response to this, her mother only looked at the scattered decorations and told her that everything was right, because Heidi was her own sister, and there was no need to set her up. But Sasha only crossed her arms and said that she did everything right, and that she didn't need a sister like that anyway. As it turned out, Sasha's mother was her stepmother, as she addressed her, hugging her to calm her down, saying that Haley didn't even know etiquette, and therefore wasn't worthy of being an aristocrat. And no one suspected that right on the other side of the door stood a shocked Heidi, who was holding a gift in her hand, but was listening in silence to her mother's words, saying that they loved Sasha the most. Mom continued to reassure her daughter, Sasha, telling her that Heidi was only there to connect their family with the Rossums and that she was just an ordinary ugly village girl. In response to this, Sasha indignantly said that she liked a guy named Sill, and she would not allow her younger sister to steal him from her because she was head over heels in love with him. But the mother just stood up from her seat and told her daughter that she was a real fool and that she shouldn't waste her time on Rasim, since he was just a chess piece on the board of her father, who was starting a big game. Putting her hand on her daughter's shoulder, the mother told Sasha that she was unique compared to her sister because only she had magical abilities, thanks to which she would definitely make a splash in the future. But Heidi listened to all this and could not believe her ears. Her hands gradually began to shake from shock, and she was trembling so much she could almost drop the plate of goodies that she had brought for the family. There was a genuine emotion of total devastation and sadness on her face, because of which she could not even return, continuing to stand in place and be disappointed in those people who were closest to her. Meanwhile, everything was already quiet in Karen's estate. There were no people in the corridor at all, and Mother was not busy humiliating the maids, which is why an unusual silence reigned in the palace. In such a calm atmosphere, two maids' friends were walking along the bright corridor, carrying a bucket with a mop in their hands, and talking about how, according to rumors, Belle brought a lot of beets to the palace, as well as dirty water, which was suspicious and disgusting. They continued to gossip about it, parting their lips and looking at each other, saying that they did not understand why the heroine was doing such strange things, although they assumed that she was coming up with a new way of punishing them. But suddenly, right in front of them, the stepmother herself appeared looking angrily at the maids, as did the butler himself next to her, ordering them to immediately go to work and not talk here without ice. Out of fear, the two friends immediately bowed to the mistress, and with fear on their faces said that they would immediately do everything, also hastening to immediately leave the evil stepmother. The butler and stepmother couple watched as the maids ran away from them. But then the stepmother turned to her lover and said that Belle had really been acting strange lately. Looking angrily at the maids running away from her, the stepmother in dark robes shared her worries with the butler about how she felt that, after her father's funeral, they were drifting apart from each other, and she did not understand why. Trying to calm his mistress, the butler took her hand and told her not to worry so much, because Belle no longer had time to create or search for anything, since the Emperor's banquet was in 2 days. But no matter what people said behind the main character's back, no one would have guessed that at that moment, she was in the kitchen, where various frying pans were hanging on the wall, and there were plates on the table, but she didn't need them. The girl with golden hair held a stick in her hand, the end of which was in a tall bucket, while the woman herself was already getting ready to start doing something, asking Lolo if he knew how to make sugar. To this, the monster flying near the girl responded with anger, saying that he was the system itself, and therefore knew almost everything. So now he would tell her the recipe for making real sugar. Having imagined the light in a golden frame, and also having imagined in another picture a basin on the fire, Lolo began the story by saying that according to ancient custom, sugar is obtained either from beets or from cane, first boiling them to obtain syrup. After this, having imagined the resulting mixture in a luxurious frame, the monster told Belle that after preparation, the resulting liquid is allowed to cool, also filtering it for the presence of anything unnecessary. And in the end, the main character imagined in her head the finished fine sugar in her hands, which was shiny and ready to eat, looked very colorful, like real gold, only edible. In gratitude for his help, the main character patted the monster on the belly, saying that she had no idea he knew so much. But the smiling Lolo only said that he was also surprised that she would be making sugar. Continuing to work on obtaining the sar, the lady looked at him with crimson eyes, telling the nearby flying Lolo that she had never prepared it before. But the monster became angry at this, asking what she would do if nothing worked out. To this, the heroine only said with closed eyes and a smile that failure is exactly the same part of success which cannot be denied, because it will lead to better results than the initial easy victory. With these words, the lady continued to create sugar for the first time in the world. And when she finished, joyful cries were heard from the kitchen door, where she was, which were noticed by the passing maids. The bright-eyed girl gazed at the results of her creations, wearing a beautiful green dress, and smiling, telling Lolo that she had managed to create the sugar she had so longed to see. The protagonist was indeed holding a handful of shiny sugar in her skillful hands, which only shimmered even more in the sun due to its beauty, from which the lady could not take her eyes off. The word is a diamond. He imagined himself with a festive whistle, surrounded by festive confetti, shouting to his mistress that he was very glad that everything worked out for him, and that he was also extremely happy about it. Suddenly, he flew closer to her and asked if Belle knew why he chose her out of 1,000 candidates for her role, and the girl with light eyes looked at him questioningly, waiting for an answer. In response to her, Lolo touched Sokka with his hand, saying that she has strength and tenacity that allows her to move forward, and she is also strong in spirit, which makes her invincible. Hearing this, Belle only became angry, gritting her teeth, and telling Lolo that she thought he simply had no one else to choose from, and that's why he chose her, because he knew she wouldn't give up a second life. But the heroine still felt joy from the sugar she had received, which is why she poured it from hand to hand, and looked at her creation with a smile, already imagining how she would show the sugar to the Emperor and receive a title from him. Time passed, and the days flew by just as quickly, which is why the Emperor's birthday arrived. Everyone was already preparing for the banquet, which would be held in a luxurious palace with columns and a grand entrance with high doors. The most distinguished people, and even ordinary nobles, came to congratulate the Emperor, wanting to see him and receive his favor. And that is why they were in the garden, when new guests arrived in carriages with horses. Among them was the main character, accompanied by her stepmother, and next to her was a servant who showed the way, while the ladies nobly raised their chins and looked around not only the palace, but also the garden. In order to maintain at least some kind of conversation, the main character put her hand on her mother's shoulder and told her that the imperial family divides people by titles and treats them differently, which is very unfair. But the protagonist's words were interrupted by what she saw ahead. Namely, she saw the carriage of the Mount Bennett family, next to which the emperor was already standing, because for him, these are very important guests whom he wants to meet personally. Suddenly, the stepmother turned to her golden-haired stepdaughter and growled at her, ordering her not to even mention the imperial family in conversation, causing the surprised lady to look at her and simply say that she would not do so. They continued to follow the servant with short hair, who intended to lead them from the very entrance, and after a while, the couple actually found themselves in the room, when before that the doors slowly opened. The hall turned out to be very large and was designed for a large number of guests. There was also a grand piano for music and a common area for the orchestra, but the guy showed the ladies a place with his hand and said that they should come here. The girl rolled her eyes tiredly and closed them, telling her mother with displeasure that they would not be allowed in through the main entrance, but only through the side one, because they were not very noble persons, unlike dukes and kings. And while her mother was silent, Belle opened her eyes and imagined in her head a banquet with a red carpet, and guests realizing that this holiday was a very important day of the year, one might even say the most solemn. Belle would have continued to think that the purpose of this visit was to meet more noble people if her stepmother had not turned to her and warned her that she would be leaving for a while to meet Mrs. Arundel. As soon as she said that she would wait for her mother at this place, the elderly woman immediately moved away from the blonde, while Belle looked at her and seemed to follow her with her eyes, not knowing what to do. She continued to stand there and wait for her stepmother when the maids began to approach her with glasses of wine, offering her a drink, which the lady intended to do, picking up her voice and thanking the servant for the treat. Belle continued to stand not far from the crowd of aristocrats who were discussing something, but the main character only looked at them, which is why monsters flew around her, hinting to come closer and saying that it was more lively there than here. But the protagonist of the story only responded to Lolo, saying that it was all on display, and that's why she didn't want to talk to them, which caused the monster above her head to make a displeased face, not knowing what else to do. Belle preferred to just watch from afar, as the two ladies, a blonde and a brunette, were actively discussing something, remembering that nobles in this world just love to gather in groups. She also remembered something and imagined in her mind a golden scale with two groups of nobles, realizing that there were those who valued heritage and noble origin, but there were also those who valued only the power of the nobility. While behind her, two ladies with fair hair were discussing something over glasses of wine. The blonde with raspberry eyes herself was saying out loud that the more powerful someone is, the more in demand they are among the poor. She also looked at the visitors with her rich pink eyes, telling Lolo that now was not the time to act, as she had to look around the area and find out where the novel's protagonist was. And after some time, the lady decided to go out into the fresh air without waiting for her stepmother, because outside there was a very beautiful white gazebo, as well as a garden and an artificial pond with short bridges. Unable to bear the strain, the main character decided to lie down on the bench and lean back against its back, breathing in the fresh air, telling Lolo that she wasn't yet accustomed to high society, which is why she wanted to be alone. Lolo sat down next to her, saying with displeasure that there were only mosquitoes here for now, and he wasn't sure that she would be able to find Sill here and complete the task that he had entrusted to her, while the heroine listened to him and watched. And when the lady answered the monster that she was just waiting for Sill, Lolo only looked at her with displeasure, saying that, in his opinion, she was only praying and did not want to complete the task. But suddenly, the lady's conversation with her imaginary friend was interrupted by screams, which made them look ahead and realize that a lady in red was screaming at another lady, saying that she didn't want her to come because only her father needed her. This madame turned out to be Sasha, who immediately poured wine on her sister when she heard her addressing her, saying that she needed to leave here and not disgrace her aristocratic family anymore. Seeing this, the story's main character immediately covered her mouth with her hand, in surprise, continuing to watch what was happening in the bushes, and realizing that a real massacre of sisters was taking place here. There was a large red stain from the alcohol left near the girl's chest, but she still continued to be kind to her sister, telling her with pitiful green eyes that this was too much and that she didn't want to turn everything into a quarrel. But Sasha continued to hold out her glass in her direction with an angry face saying that she would tell her father everything, and soon it would become clear to him that she was a simple girl from the village, an imposter who didn't even have manners. At that moment, the main character imagined in her head a dark silhouette Heidi and Sasha's father in golden ornaments, realizing that he had the same status and honor as the Rassam family. But also imagining the silhouette of the girl's father among the wings, the heroine knows that only this family teaches people magic, which means that they are not only precious, but also unique and incomparable in the Empire. Imagining a pink-haired girl surrounded by magical elements, also wearing a dark coat and hat, holding a staff in her hands, the lady realized that although magic was controlled in the world in this family, it provided an important criterion for assessing strength. Sasha, who knows this very well, suddenly grabbed her sister by the face and slyly said that she was now a mage being trained by her parents, and that meant that they wouldn't do anything, even if she beat her up instead of pouring wine on her. Hearing these words, Heidi instantly became furious and looked at her sister with anger hitting her hand, which made it jump off her face, also asking Sasha how dare she say such a thing. Their argument would have continued further, taking on new colors, if they had not both noticed strange movements and sounds in the bushes nearby, which made them both look there, realizing that someone was there. Unlike Sasha, Haley was a little scared and surprised, which is why she remained silent in surprise, while the angry Sasha screamed and asked who was sitting there, already preparing to express her anger to him. Meanwhile, the main heroine was still sitting in the bushes, with a disgruntled Lolo flying over her. I understand that something interesting will happen now if they were noticed, because of the unexpected noise. As it turned out, Belle had decided to kill the mosquito while in ambush, which is why she was looking at the now extinct insect, which seemed to thank her at least for the blood it had managed to drink before its death. The main character was only amused by the situation and continued laughing in the bushes, as if she had already forgotten that she had been secretly following the sisters' conversation. And now she only smiled, holding a dead insect in her hands. Lolo immediately took offense at her and started yelling at her, asking if she couldn't have held out just so he could watch the performance that Haley and Sasha had started. But the calm Belle replied that she couldn't, because a mosquito had bitten her. But Sasha and Heidi continued to look into the bushes all this time, waiting for the moment when the incognito would understand that he would no longer be able to eavesdrop, because they were both waiting for him to come out and show himself. And the protagonist of the story quickly realized that she had been noticed, which is why she covered her mouth with her hand in embarrassment, not understanding what to expect. And Lolo did the same, whispering, asking if she thought that they would continue to be invisible with such sounds. But Sasha wasn't going to wait for anything for long, because she resolutely placed her hands on her waist, telling the unknown person in the bushes to immediately get out and show himself. Otherwise, she would call security. Having heard the mistress's words, the main character almost immediately appeared nearby to her sister, holding her dress with her hand in order to quickly get out of the fat and pass by them unnoticed. But as soon as Heidi noticed the girl she knew whom she had seen earlier, she immediately covered her mouth with her hand, widening her eyes in pleasant shock and shouting to Belle that she knew her. Then the heroine of the story realized that she was not dressed to pass by the girls, and so she turned with him, looking at each one with an excited face, while a drop of sweat flowed down her cheeks, and she said, "This is an amazing meeting." Sasha was in no hurry to greet the blonde, even when she waved to everyone smiling for the sake of propriety, which only Heidi was happy about, saying that she was glad to see her. A puzzled Sasha turned her head to her sister, asking if they knew each other, and clearly not understanding what was going on, while the blonde with golden hair continued to stand in front. And at that moment, they both told Sasha that they were more unfamiliar than acquainted, because they both thoughtfully recalled their first meeting when Heidi noticed Belle on the floor losing consciousness. But their conversation did not last too long, because on the horizon appeared the one whom Sasha really wanted to see, because she fell in love with him, and also Belle, who was waiting for him. And the thing is that this is Sill with blue hair and beautiful lips. Lolo even notified the main character that he had discovered the novel's protagonist Sill, acting as a notifier and a system that would help the heroine complete his task. And while Lolo informed the main character that the novel's protagonist was gradually getting closer, She only rejoiced, clenching her fists, and with stars in her eyes, smiling, preparing to see how a third character would intervene in the quarrel between the two sisters, just like in TV series. But the monster noticed in time that Belle was happy that there would be new gossip, and therefore looked at her a little disapprovingly, saying that now was not the time to bother with other thoughts because she needed to complete the task. The small, plump creature continued to fly above the head of the slightly angry heroine, whose face turned blue with displeasure. But she still did not decide to say anything to him because his words were already true. Then the lady remembered that she just needed to contact Sill. So an imaginable indignation immediately appeared on her face, as if Sasha would raze her to the ground for this, which is why she imagined herself already beaten while Lola was flying. But as soon as the monster said that, if she was not going to complete the task, then she could accept the punishment, the golden-haired beauty's face instantly changed for the better, saying that she would do everything now. Meanwhile, Sill had already approached the girls and bestowed upon them all his beauty, purple hair, and eyes also looking in their direction and shouting out Heidi's name, since most likely he was not indifferent to her. The pink-haired girl quickly turned around at the sound and realized that she saw a familiar face in front of her, which is why she also said Sill's name, not yet understanding what he intended to do and why he had approached. But Lolo could no longer wait for the moment when the main character would approach Sill and complete her task confessing something to him. And that is why he looked at her with angry eyebrows, ordering her to carry out his order. In response to this, Belle only raised her hand and with her eyes closed told Lolo to wait because she did not want to rush. And besides, something more interesting was about to happen than before. As a result, the main character found herself in front of two girls who could not find a common language and who looked at her with anticipation of an answer. And in addition to them, Sill, who needed something, joined her company. But Sasha was no longer interested in her sister or Belle, who had appeared out of nowhere, because her green eyes instantly caught the one she was so deeply in love with, causing her eyelids to open wider and sparkle with light. She quickly walked up to Sill and grabbed his hand with a sincere smile, asking what he was doing here, and clearly trying to please him, but the man didn't really like the woman, judging by his indifferent face. Sill did not want to tolerate the aska of the one whom he possibly saw for the first time in his life, and the one who dared to accept the attempt to destroy Heidi's reputation. So he sharply hit the girl's hand, removing it from himself. Instead of paying attention to each one, the young man with purple hair walked up to Heidi and put his hands on her shoulders, looking into her eyes, and asking with concern what happened to her and why she was like that. And as soon as the pink-haired girl even hesitantly opened her mouth and explained to the guy where she got the stain on her dress, she was immediately interrupted by Sasha, who raised her hand and said that she would tell him everything now. Heidi didn't even dare say a word, while her older sister looked at Sill with a smile and lied to him, saying that her younger sister had just run into a maid, and that's why she had stained her dress with wine, and she was here to supposedly change her into other clothes. Mrs. Heidi looked at the whole situation with uncertainty, afraid to tell the truth, and also not understanding why her sister distorted the facts, because everyone already knew that she tried to humiliate her and is a bad person herself. But Sill wasn't going to believe someone who wanted to make Heidi look like a fool in front of everyone. So he turned to the novel's main character and sternly asked if it was true or if Sasha was lying about the stain. Haley didn't answer Silu because her older sister intervened in the conversation again, saying that she wouldn't bully her supposedly beloved sister anymore, so there was no need to prove that he was lying. In fact, the novel's pink-haired protagonist was silent with her head down because she didn't want to cause problems for her father, who had already brought her from the village intending to make an aristocrat out of her. Therefore, immediately after she realized this, with a dark face, she raised her head, trying to portray a smile and politeness. Also Silu's head as if Sasha's words were true, and he had no need to worry. And while Sill stood in front of her and was silent, Heidi only put her hand on her chest, saying that she would now go and change her clothes herself, while Sasha also looked at the guy, but very enthusiastically, with a welcoming smile. Heidi had to leave the couple quickly because she already felt superfluous when her sister just leaned against the man, hugged him by the hand, and said that it was right that she left. But Sill didn't like it. The pink-haired girl just continued walking forward, not even intending to tell Sill the truth, because he didn't want any conflicts, so she just bowed to everyone, put her hand on her chest, and said that she would be back soon. All this time, Sill looked only at Heidi, to whom he was clearly not indifferent, and therefore could not take his eyes off her, not even paying attention to her sister, who was trying to attract attention with smiles and hugs. He clenched his fist in displeasure, as he had no intention of causing a scandal on this ground, and especially putting Lady Sasha in an awkward position, so he held his anger in his palm, hoping for another chance. Even though Heidi turned away from everyone, the sadness on her face did not disappear, but only became stronger, which is why she did not even look forward while the guy behind her clearly wanted to see her. But Sasha hugged her as if they were a couple. Lolo was also watching all this and realized that his mistress was talking about exactly what had happened between them. But when it was all over, he looked at her with wide eyes and asked if she needed to complete a task. However, as soon as he turned around to see Belle next to him, he realized with horror that she was not even there, and in the place where she had been a couple of minutes ago, he saw only her outline. Meanwhile, the corridors of the imperial palace were very empty and lonely, but one lady was walking along them, her steps echoing along the corridor with a long red carpet. It was Heidi who had remained silent until now, and continued to walk, thinking about what had happened in complete silence, still wearing the dress that her older sister had stained with wine, leaving a red stain. It seemed to her that there was no one next to her, but this was a false feeling, because behind her, she clearly felt someone's presence, which is why she turned around, not understanding what was going on. Even when she looked at the floor, she realized with horror that she saw under her feet not just a carpet of red shades, but someone's shadow, who was apparently pursuing her, or perhaps trying to catch up with her. Unable to bear it any longer, she decided to suddenly turn around and angrily ask the stranger who he was and why he was following her. But the unknown figure only hid behind a column. Imagine the girl's surprise when she realized that in front of her stood a familiar blonde with raspberry eyes whom she had already met some time ago, and who anointed her with her hand to smooth over the awkwardness. And while Belle waved to the lady with a sweet smile on her face, the pink-haired beauty was very surprised by her appearance, looking at her, and pronouncing her name as if she had never expected to see her here. She looked at her with bewilderment and slight surprise, continuing to stand in place, and asking why she decided to follow her, what scared her so much, and why she was afraid that hooligans had come for her. In response, the lady with golden hair only scratched her head from the awkward moment, continuing to look at her and saying only that she still caught her, although she tried to be secretive and unnoticeable. Heidi lowered her head, thinking that Belle also came to laugh at her, which made her eyes very sad, and she asked the heroine why she came for her if she had already heard their whole quarrel. Hearing this, the golden-haired madam immediately spread her hands with excitement and said that she had not intended to mock or bully her at all, and in general, she was not here for that at all, which is why she was standing in front of her now. Adjusting a strand of her hair with her finger, the girl closed her eyes and admitted with slight embarrassment that she followed her only out of nervousness because she wanted to tell her how she was feeling and her mood. This made the main character of the novel happy, so she began to clap her hands in front of her friend, looking at her with a smile and bright eyes, and saying that she really is very attentive and she likes it. Heidi's words touched Belle deeply, which is why she, just like the green-eyed beauty, does put her hand on her chest and began to look at her friend in surprise, as if this was a very important compliment for her. For Belle, these words turned out to be the most sincere of those she had received from someone in this world, because she slowly bowed her head, and while magical petals were already flying around her, she mentally transported herself to the past, or rather to her life, before being reborn into a novel. The very first memory that the main character recalled from her life is connected with her boyfriend, whom she often hugged and to whom she once gave a scarf that she made with her own hands, which the man was pleased with. Remembering that life when she was still an ordinary brunette, a boss at work, she clearly remembered how she gave her manager a drink, saying that she looked tired and therefore deserved it, and the girl was happy. Then Belle imagined her past self and her present self next to her, realizing that people often said she was very attentive when they wanted to describe her, which is why she hears that word again and again in her new life. But she also imagined a beautiful golden text message with jewelry thinking that there had been so many false words in her life that had hurt her, which is why she often put on a kind mask, trying to see only the good. Also imagining herself in a past life behind and her current self in front. And with the same sad faces, the lady realized that only Heidi made her feel warm from the words she said to her. She even sighed, arching her back from the front and asking Lolo why she couldn't be friends with such a nice lady like her, when the character history and the original story prevented them from doing so. Remembering the original plot, the heroine just remembered that according to the plot, Sill should invite her to dance, because of which they will then happily waltz with smiles, which is what she imagined. But because her dress is dirty, according to the plot, she will never be able to dance with the guy, because Sasha interfered with her wine, who will then also win the emperor's favor with a smile. The lady also recalled a conversation with Lolo, when he flew over her head, and said that her task as a passerby was to help advance the plot, but not to touch on the most important plots, because they were not for her. Putting her hand to her chin, the golden-haired heroine looked away and began to think about whether it would be a violation to advance between the main characters, or whether she was not here for that. Understanding the main thing, the main character not only looked forward with motivation, but also remembered above her head that in fact it was Heidi who should be with Sill, and her sister should only stand nearby and envious. Then she decided to immediately grab Heidi's hand, perceiving her as the only person in this world who treats her well, also thinking that she will not allow others to mock kind Heidi the way Sasha does impudently and rudely. With her crimson eyes, in which there was no longer a single doubt, the girl looked at the pink-haired lady and told her to quickly follow her, because she would not leave this situation, and her alone. Without waiting for an answer, Belle forcibly dragged Heidi along with her, because protecting her in front of everyone was the most important thing for her. But the beauty with green eyes did not understand anything, and that is why she was nervous, asking what was going on. And while the ladies were already about to appear before Sasha and Sill with different intentions at that time, calm, lively music was already playing in the main hall, while aristocrats and ladies were circling on and around the red carpet. Duke Argus watched all this from the balcony, holding a glass of wine in her hand and not taking her eyes off the celebration, asking the servant in a serious voice whether he had found those whom he had ordered to find earlier. Behind him stood his butler, with gray hair and a mustache, who bowed and obediently replied that he had found someone in the banquet hall, but he did not see Belle herself anywhere since she was not there. Then the man with the light eyes presented the koalas with expensive wine to their lips, continuing to look ahead and asking the butler if he had managed to find Mrs. Karen, that is the main character's stepmother. In response, Argus's faithful servant continued to bow and answer with his eyes closed, saying that Lady Karen was now with Lady Arundel, and that they were actively discussing something together. At this, the white-haired, dark-skinned Duke only closed his eyes, holding a glass next to him, and ordering the butler to continue to keep an eye on everyone. But if he saw Belle out of the corner of his eye, he said he should immediately report her to him. And to this the butler said that he would do everything. As soon as the personal butler left Argus's company, he began to seriously ponder why his master was so interested in Lady Belle, and he could not understand whether Argus had become interested in women rather than rejecting them. While Argus was trying to keep track of everyone, Mrs. Karen was talking to her friend about life, and the main character herself entered the pleasant living room with red walls with Heidi to talk alone. She pressed the pink-haired beauty against the wall so persistently that Heidi was very scared, blushing and not understanding what was going on at the same time, although the determined Belle only wanted to ask about something important. The girl raised her hands to her face in embarrassment, continuing to look at the blonde with a blush on her face, asking what she was doing, because Belle's strange behavior caused her some fear and apprehension. But the lady never received an answer to her question, because the serious and even somewhat frightening Belle ordered her not to ask unnecessary questions, which is why Heidi fell silent, looking at her with unquestioning eyes. Then the main character, looking at the familiar one with ruby eyes, and also frowning in addition to asking not to ask unnecessary questions, also told her to quickly undress. In the following minutes, very interesting things happened in the room where the girls were, but among the rest of the people, the celebration continued, which is why they held glasses of wine in their hands and danced, talking about different things. The conversation with her friend was also finished by the stepmother in the dark dress, who, as soon as she noticed Belle with golden hair, immediately looked at her sideways and put her hands on her basin, asking what happened to her dress and where she had been. It seemed that Belle herself did not know what to answer because she changed into Heidi's dress, on which a large red wine stain was visible, for which the heroine could not come up with an excuse. In the end, she decided to simply bow to her stepmother and answer with her head down, saying that something had happened, and she didn't want her to question her about it, so she was keeping silent. The stepmother just waved her hand at the main character and turned her back to her, getting ready to go somewhere, and saying that the dress was specially made for her and it was very expensive. But when she realized that all the talk was in vain, the mother only lowered her head and pinned her face with her hand, telling her stepdaughter that they were wasting their time, and that therefore she needed to quickly go to the carriage and change into a spare dress. As if nothing had happened, Belle stood there with her head down and her eyes closed, telling her mother that she would now go and change her clothes, and this made her look like a very mysterious person who was doing who knows what. With such thoughts, the mother looked at the main character, looking around and not understanding what kind of adventure the lady could have come up with for herself. But she does not want Marquis George to meet her in such a dress, otherwise she might not even think about the engagement. Meanwhile, the main character was already running down the corridor towards the carriage, holding her dirty dress in her hands, while Lolo was flying over her head and closely watching her run. She immediately flew up to her mistress and asked with a serious face where she had gone and why she was wearing the main character's dress. But Belle was in no hurry to answer him, only looking at her friend with ruby eyes. Then the lady decided to answer with a smile. The Maud, she did nothing wrong, but on the contrary, she made the plot develop for the better, as little Lolo wished. But the little monster with wings and horns only smiled unpleasantly, continuing to fly over the main character's head, and telling her that today's plot development was very important, and she needed to not ruin everything. In response, the girl with golden hair raised her head to Lolo, and with her hand near her chin, asked if the most important characters would be present today, to which Lolo replied that this was indeed the case. Hearing that everyone would gather in one place, the main character's mouth opened in surprise and anticipation, telling Lolo, with bright eyes, that she was really looking forward to a big massacre. But he replied that first she had to complete the task. After that, the girl fell silent because she really needed to concentrate on the task. That's why she took the first step forward with her green shoes. But suddenly, she heard something. She quickly walked towards the column so that people wouldn't notice her, after which she began to listen warily to their conversations about what a coward Argus was and how disgusting he was. When she leaned her back against the wall and peeked out unnoticed, she realized that there was indeed a lady and gentleman standing behind her, smiling and talking about Argus and humiliating him. Noticing that his mistress was once again doing something she wasn't supposed to, a disgruntled Lolo flew up to her and reminded her of the task. But the girl only peeked out from behind the wall, saying that she wanted to eavesdrop on their conversation. A pair of aristocrats stood nearby and talked about how, if it weren't for the demonic tower, Argus would have long since lost his status as heir, and also after the disappearance of a certain Mrs. Emma, the relationship between the tower and the Rassam family had collapsed. At that moment, the main character imagined in her head a beautiful blonde with blue magical abilities, realizing that Emma was Argus's mother, the sister of the head of the demonic tower. The lady also imagined the long-lost Duke Rassam, who left everyone when he was exposed as a fraud, and has been missing for more than 10 years. Having presented Argus and Sill on the scales, the Ice realized that the inheritance and title should have passed to the Duke's son under the name Sill, but the forces had to be balanced because of Argus, which is what the demonic tower did since he is the Duke's half-son. And in the end, all the people imagined a throne with 2 swords, which symbolizes Argus and Silas, without understanding which of them would rule the throne if the Duke disappeared. And this topic is very often heard in the gossip of aristocrats. The lady with golden hair was mixing all this in her head, lowering her head, and realizing that these 2 gossips were not for Argus, judging by the fact that they were calling him a complete fool and a loser. But the lady had no idea that while she was watching the gossips, Argus was personally watching her, and he had been searching for her for a long time throughout the imperial palace, wanting to see hers. Behind him also stood a butler, with gray hair and a mustache, who looked at his master and asked if he needed to deal with those gossips who were spreading false rumors about him. Turning slightly to the servant, the white-haired man said that he should only do this when the banquet was over, as he did not want to cause trouble for the emperor, to which the butler only bowed. But the gossips continued to mock Argus, saying that his mother was a real coward who ran away from him for her lover, and his father also ran away from everyone because he did not want to connect his life with him. This really didn't please the main character, who listened to the gossip and understood that people were making everything up in order to later ridicule Argus, which is why she showed them her fist with a displeased face, intending to intervene. Because in her past life, Belle often heard the dirtiest gossip from her acquaintances, which they told with smiles, saying that her mother had run away with her lover, and that no one needed Belle herself, even though she stood nearby and listened. And even when she was standing nearby at work, a couple in suits gossiped about her, with smiles saying that even her boyfriend had dumped her, who apparently found himself a more interesting lover than Belle, who was always busy at work. The main character remembered all these ridicule very well, and especially clearly in her head were the smiles of people and their laughter when they remembered her and laughed at the heroine's life as if she were a reason for laughter. Dressed in simple office clothes, the old Belle seemed to be all alone in the world, where no one heard her and where everyone called her a mistress, pathetic, abandoned, or divorced. She lowered her head and realized that these people simply wanted to humiliate her and find a reason to smile. And now the golden-haired lady understood that their words were not just a sound, but a weapon that could hurt more than a sword. That is why the girl decided not to stand aside and listen to people's gossip, but came out to them suddenly and unexpectedly, pointing her finger at them and shouting for them to look at her immediately. The girl, clenching her fist in anger, looked at them with furrowed brows and ordered them to shut up immediately before they enraged her even more, and they would later deeply regret it. The lady in the bright dress and the man in the suit turned their heads in amazement towards Belle, so surprised they couldn't understand who she was. So they continued to look at her with their mouths open, and the girl covered her face with a fan. With her hand on her belt, the lady continued to look at them with anger, asking why they dared to insult someone's mother if the media were not judges or anything else, but ordinary commoners who had nothing better to do. The girl frowned even more deeply and opened her mouth wide, shouting at the gossips, saying, "How dare they come to the celebration and disgrace themselves by telling each other such nasty things about Duke Argus in silence." In response, the lady in the bright pink dress also pointed her finger at Belle, asking her what difference it makes if they condemn Argus, since they don't even know her name, and she's not his wife to stand up for hers. To this, the lady answered briefly, placing her hand on her chest and proudly saying that her name was Belle Karen, and she had every right to condemn them too for insults if they had no manners and honor towards others. She looked at the couple with her beautiful crimson eyes and continued to shout that even if she was not Argus, she would not dare to discuss not only him, but also the Duke's family, because she knew that they were liars and envious. The Duke with white hair himself was watching all this, unable to find the words, but he did not plan to give himself away, because he knew that Belle with her character would not allow others to talk like that about her acquaintances. The man actually bowed his head forward and looked down at the bad words of the gossips, remembering that he had always been called different things, but often he was called an illegitimate child in an aristocratic family. He remembers very well that he was not bullied, not only by adults now, but also by children in childhood, who kicked him, causing him to fall to the ground, and they bullied him because he was born to one mother and raised by another. Argus also remembers those moments when, having been beaten by children, he came to his father and waited for support. But with his head bowed, he listened to his father's dissatisfaction, saying that because he fought, he would no longer have an heir. Finding himself alone in an empty world, little Argus, with anger on his face and fists being completely covered in wounds, realized that in this world no one would protect him, so he must fight everyone himself. But now he sees the main character in front of him, who with her hands on her hips insistently asks the gossips to apologize to him, which causes strange feelings to arise in Argus's head. In response to Belle's request, one of the gossips only crossed his arms and looked at the lady with mockery, saying that she fell in love with Argus because of poverty and now protects him wherever necessary. The girl and the man looked at the protagonist of the story with a smile, saying that no matter how bad Argus was, he was now the heir of the Rossum family, and if she wanted to marry him, she needed to wait until he was kicked out of the family. However, even the gossips themselves did not expect that it was not just Belle who would appear before them, but Argus himself, who slowly emerged from the shadows, and with only slightly parted lips, interrupted the conversation, apologizing to everyone in advance. He appeared right next to the astonished main character, who was no less surprised than the others, which is why she looked at him with wide eyes, while he looked at the couple and said that the day of his expulsion from the family would never come. The man covered Belle with his broad shoulder and began to tell the gossips that they were wrong everywhere, while the protagonist of the story remained silent and looked at his appearance with surprise and unexpectedness. The lady in the bright dress and the guy next to her were so surprised by the Duke's appearance that they jerked in place, in fear raised their hands up, and shouted Argus's name while he himself stood and looked at them. The man, confused and awkward, who had previously condemned not only Argus, but also the main character, suddenly scratched his head in embarrassment and said with a smile that he suddenly had important things to do and needed to leave. She also answered Argus and the lady next to him, who pointed with her hands to the end of the corridor, uncertainly muttering to everyone that she also needed to go somewhere with him, which is why she immediately left here. After a short and timid farewell, the couple quickly turned and walked away from Argus with awkwardness on their faces, while the Duke stood behind them and only watched without saying a word. And while Argus's offenders were leaving, Belle stuck her tongue out at them, teased them, shouting that they were real cowards. But even this no longer touched the gossips, and they wanted to quickly get away from the formidable Argus. Only when the boy and the girl were alone did the Duke with white hair and dark skin turn his head back to the protagonist and say her name as if he was about to tell her something. The tall man's voice and behavior made even Belle feel uneasy, so she took a couple of steps away from him, looking him in the eyes, with fear, asking what was wrong, and afraid that he would yell at her for really meddling in something that wasn't her business. But what was the surprise of the girl with blonde hair when the man came closer to her and simply asked if she had fallen in love with him, clarifying this with such a face as if he expected the most serious answer from her. On Belle's face, which didn't understand anything, there was only an emotion of genuine bewilderment with which she looked at the guy and remained silent, as if she expected to hear anything from him, but not this. She only curled her lip and eye, still wondering what to answer the white-haired man to such a direct question, from which her anger at the gossips instantly turned into silence and stupor. The heroine's third emotion, as a stage of development, was genuine bewilderment and even panic, from which she grabbed her head in amazement, not understanding why Argus was asking her such a thing and where she was at all. And while the girl, speechless, only made the sign of the cross to Argus, as if to say that he was thinking exactly the same thing until he made a big mistake, the man himself only crossed his arms, saying that he couldn't understand why she had protected him. Having decided to calm down, the lady regained her ability to speak after the shock, so she told the Duke with a smirk that she just wanted to teach the gossips a lesson, and she could not ignore their lies. But that was not all, because no matter what the girl said to her interlocutor, he again asked her with a frowning face whether she loved him or whether she loved him, and that was why he was standing up for her. And the main character, deciding that her words would not be enough for Argus, raised her hand with 2 fingers up and looked at him seriously, swearing that she did not love him, even with a drop in her heart. After that, she awkwardly turned back while the man was still looking at her, saying that they should go to the banquet now, since they would be late. But in fact, the protagonist was thinking that she would never allow herself to fall in love with the main villain of the novel. Argus never said a word to the main character, but decided to follow her further with a displeased face and a feeling as if his heart had just been broken, although he did not expect any other answer from her. Soon, Lolo appeared next to the girl, asking her with displeasure how much longer he would have to look for her before she was found and why she looked untidy. but Belle only remained silent with a frown. She just meekly told the monster that she was wrong, and she really should have kept quiet in that situation. So she resolutely looked forward and told him that now she needed to get down to business. A few minutes passed, and live orchestral music began to play in the main hall, created by girls with violins and cellos, also dressed up in honor of the holiday and smiling. As the main character wanted, Hale appeared in the hall with Sill because they both wanted to dance a waltz. But when Heidi watched the dancing, she hesitantly told her partner that she was a little afraid due to her inexperience. The girl with pink hair lowered her head and told Sill that this was her first dance at an official event, and that she was very nervous because she didn't know a lot. But the man with blue hair only put his hand on Heidi's mother, which surprised her very much, as she was surprised by his words that she should not worry, since she should rely on him. He turned to her and with a smile and confidence said that he himself would direct her where she needed to go, and that she didn't need to just obey him, and then everything would work out for them, even if she didn't know anything. In response, the girl with green eyes only blushed and smiled, looking down and agreeing with Sill, noticing how kind he was to her. But the girl also remembered the one who helped her reach this wonderful moment, namely Smiling Belle, who had previously persistently helped her with the dress. The thing is that earlier, the protagonist not only pinned her to the wall and ordered her to undress immediately, but also told her to understand everything correctly because she wanted to change her into her dress clean and best. The girl looked at Heidi with her crimson eyes, very persistently saying that she just wanted to repay her debt and provide the same help as when she helped her when she fainted. And when the pink-haired protagonist of the novel looked into the face of Belle smiling at her, she realized that although she was often clumsy, her intuition about good people had never failed her, and she believed her. Then she bowed her head forward, put her hands on her chest, and with her eyes closed, she realized that the heroine was a good person because she was truly standing in her dress, new and blue, very expensive. And so Heidi now dances her first dance with Sill without any sadness, already forgetting how her sister had previously offended her, and how sad she was, because now all the problems seem small to her. But at that time, her older sister Sasha was looking at her, who still couldn't come to terms with the fact that Sill didn't have feelings for her, which is why she looked at the dancers with her teeth tightened, envying her sister. She even clenched her hands into fists in anger, and also gritted her teeth, looking angrily at the couple, and not understanding why her father allowed her sister to dance with Sill before her, because she really likes him. But the couple themselves didn't care about the looks of others, because they continued to dance with smiles on their faces, spinning around the floor, while Sill held the girl's hand and looked at her. And while Heidi trusted him, they performed many beautiful moves that could have aroused admiration, even among aristocrats. And it seemed that they were both not worried, relying only on their feelings, which added color to their dance. And the main character of the story had already managed to change her clothes and show up at the ball, which was already in full swing. But she looked at it with sadness because Lolo was flying around her and reminding her that she needed to complete her task. With determination, the girl placed her fist on her chest and said that she would not miss her opportunity and would approach Sill immediately after the first dance to confess something to him. And Lolo, with an imaginary bandage on his forehead, as if he were a real fighter, answered the girl that this was a very correct position, because she would not want Belle to let him down again and her life in the world. He even looked at his mistress with a contemptuous, serious eye, asking if she wanted to lose things that were important to her again, and save her life here, continuing to be in the circle of aristocrats. A little sad because of her bad thoughts, the heroine only looked away and told Lolo that everything he said was true, but after that, she kicked him in the tail, hinting that she wanted to hear less of his threats. But she still raised her hand to her face, and felt sad thinking that no matter how she looked at it, she felt very sorry for the main character, because what she would do for the sake of the task could cross out their friendship and even more so hurt her. When Lolo asked the girl why she was sad, Belle imagined Sill and Heidi in her head, saying that the readers only see that she saved the main character from injury, and he fell in love with her because of her magic. She imagined a book without text in her head, leafing through it with her hand, and realizing that although Heidi was sincere with him, Sill's love was based only on interest in her as Saint Tranti. Belle again imagined in her head a couple in the form of Sill and Heidi, holding hands, realizing that the pink-haired beauty would become sad when she found out that she was just a pawn in the hands of Sill and Argus. Then Lolo told Belle that she was thinking very narrowly, since Heidi, as the main character, has a certain aura that attracts men, which is what the heroine imagined in her head, realizing that Heidi has many options for the development of her destiny, and all of them will have a happy ending, because she is the main character. At that moment, Belle sadly remembered herself in a past life with her boyfriend, where they were smiling in a photograph, but she was torn apart when Belle mentally realized that she herself did not have the same aura that Heidi had. But these thoughts only led the main character to the conclusion that she should not rely on men, but be the mistress of her own destiny. And she realized this under the melodic music of string instruments in the banquet hall. Time passed, and after a few minutes, other couples were already dancing among the aristocrats, who also wanted to enjoy the holiday, but Celia and Heidi were no longer among them. Lolo was still hovering over the protagonist's head and supporting her in everything, saying that now she should not miss the chance to confess to Sill, since she herself said that she would do it right after his dance with Heidi. But suddenly, a servant of the imperial palace loudly announced to everyone the arrival of the main aristocrat of the holiday, that is, the imperator, who had gathered everyone today in honor of his birthday. Everyone present saw in front of them not only the emperor, but also his wife Catherine, who had previously been his mistress, and who wants to marry the heroine to her son George, but no one suspects this, continuing to clap. Duke Argus looked at the emperor, without any visible emotion on her face, and without even clapping, watching his appearance as if he had something to think about, not even about him, but about himself, and the main character, her feelings. Sill and Heidi, on the other hand, looked at the emperor with sincere smiles, stood nearby, and admired his chic red outfit, which only emphasized his status. Sasha, who hid her face behind a fan, but was wearing such a bright red dress, was also looking at the birthday boy of the holiday, as if she wanted everyone to look at her as often as at the empress herself. And while the emperor's mistress, named Catherine, stood nearby and smiled at everyone, Emperor Charles himself loudly said that he thanked all those who came to his holiday and congratulated him. After this, the couple raised their glasses of wine, congratulating each on the celebration, which everyone present did, preparing to take a sip for the health and greatness of the ruler. But Lolo couldn't calm down, because her owner continued to stand still and do nothing, so he nervously waved his arms and legs, telling her to immediately complete the task before it was too late. However, Belle was in no hurry to go to Sill, because her face clearly showed the emerging excitement and wariness when she looked at the emperor with wide eyes and understood something. Having imagined the book and the emperor himself in her head, the girl remembered in time that in the novel the ruler appears only once more precisely at this banquet, and if she did not offer him sugar right now, she would miss the opportunity to appease him and receive the title, as a result of which the estate and inheritance would go to the evil stepmother. She continued to stand and think hard, imagining over her head the possible scenarios of how the plot would develop when she would approach the emperor with sugar or confess to Sill and complete the task. Out of desperation, she grabbed her head and screamed once again that she didn't understand what to do and how to act correctly if she had to do two things almost at the same time. And while the protagonist of the story was giving in to panic, the couple of Sill and Heidi stood nearby and talked with smiles about how they had a beautiful dance, although the lady also modestly replied that it was thanks to him. Looking at the lady, the gentleman with blue hair looked at the moo and said that he had important things to do, because of which he had to leave her, to which the pink-haired beauty only replied with a smile, saying that she wouldn't even be upset. Then he decided to look at the girl and say that if someone were to offend her, let him say who her father was, because his status was immediately after the emperor, and he was the only one who stood on par with Duke Rossum's. But the girl with green eyes only looked at the guy, and because of the conversations about her father, she just remembered the recent conversation between her older sister and her mother, which she overheard while in the palace. It was a very dark, scary night then, which the girl would not even remember, but her gloom only grew stronger when she realized that no one in the family considered her a member of the family, but they were using her. While Sasha's mother and she were sitting in the room and talking about how their father seemed to have rebelled against the emperor, and wanted to take his place. They had no idea that Heidi was eavesdropping on them from behind the wall. With her eyes closed and a smile on her face, the mother explained to her daughter that Heidi was there so that she would marry Celia, and he would then become emperor, allowing them to create the best moment for their father to rebel. Leaning against the wall, Heidi heard the truth from her mother, with shock on her face, but was afraid to even move lest her older sister and her mother realized they were being eavesdropped on from outside. Returning to the present, the pink-haired lady looked at the handsome Sill and understood that her father wanted to use him, despite the fact that she loved him, but the girl could not betray the family. She sadly lowered her closed eyes, realizing her fate, but she still remembered the main character Belle, thinking that she would really like to have such a faithful and correct friend like her. That's why Heidi never said anything to Sill, even though she had feelings for him, and didn't even suspect that the protagonist standing next to her also had her own plans for him. Belle finally decided to carry out her task, so she called Mr. Sill to her, with a smile, intending to finally say what she had come here for. The handsome young man immediately turned around at the girl's voice and looked at her with bewilderment because he could not understand who it was, even though he had a feeling that he had seen her before. Sill looked at the sweet and beautiful blonde, who was clapping her hands and asking him to give her a couple of minutes of his attention, hoping that she would be able to complete the task. At this time, behind the main character, who was already standing in front of Sill and was about to tell him something, stood a bewildered Heidi, very surprised by her friend's behavior, and therefore covering her mouth with her hand. And even Sill himself seemed to remember Belle, because he had recently seen her with his own eyes, in one town, where she saved an old woman from hooligans, and then bought all the beats from her smiling and showing politeness. The purple-haired guy widened his eyes slightly in surprise, and looked away, realizing that this was the lady who had interested him earlier, but now he didn't even want to pretend that he knew her. So the man turned to the golden-haired stranger, with curiosity on his face, asking if they knew each other and what she wanted from him, not understanding what else such a sweet girl like her could need. And unexpectedly, for everyone, including Sill himself, the main character of the story crossed her fingers on her hand, and looking at the man with admiration, sincerely said that she loved him very much. But Sill simply did not understand the girl's words, looking at her with warning and trying to understand what the lady was saying, because as he remembered, this was their first meeting in life. This surprised Heidi very much, as she had been standing nearby the whole time and heard Belle's words, which amazed her greatly because she truly believed that she loved Mr. Sill. At that moment, Belle herself felt like a soldier saluting Lolo as she successfully completed the task to make Haley's heart tremble, which is what began to happen. But Sill still did not understand the protagonist's intentions, so he continued to stand in place and look at the blonde with a stupor, after which he looked into her eyes and asked what was wrong with it that she loved him. Having decided to complete the task perfectly, the girl with crimson eyes placed her hand on her chest, continuing to imitate the sincerity of her words, after which she looked at Sill and asked if he would marry her. The couple stood right in the middle of the hall, where there were a lot of people, which is why they attracted a lot of attention. But after the girl's last words, the number of spectators of this performance increased even more, and they all looked at Sill's reaction. Not understanding the lady's intentions, the purple-haired guy looked at her with a worried expression, as if he saw a mad woman in front of him, clarifying what she said, and wondering if the lady knew what she had just suggested. Heidi herself was also surprised. It seemed she wasn't jealous of Sill's acquaintance at all, but simply stood behind her and covered her mouth, because Belle decided to admit this in front of everyone. To add more drama, the story's main character even took Sill's hand and looked into his eyes again, telling him that she loved him, while the man couldn't find the words to respond, and watched the girl's actions with his lips parted. Holding the master's hand near her chest, the beautiful blonde once again looked into his eyes and asked if she could be his wife, as if it were so easy for her that she could ask about it with a calm face and a smirk. It seemed that this had never happened to Sill, which is why he looked at the heroine with shock and incomprehension, looking only into her ruby eyes, and still thinking that the lady was unwell, and that was why she was so brave. In this exciting moment, Sill decided to remember his childhood, namely his mother and himself, when he was still a baby, recalling that although they were aristocrats, they lived in poverty and were very short of money. He imagined in his head his father standing with his mother, remembering that his father, Duke Rassam, fell in love with his mother. And then he appeared, and he did not even divorce Miss Emma. She was his legal wife. Because of this, everyone made fun of little Sill, pointed fingers at him, while he stood there and suffered the abuse, because everyone around him considered him an illegitimate nobleman who belonged on the streets. And now, because of all these memories, he looked at Belle with anger, realizing that no one even considered him a representative of pure blood, because his father was a fornicator who did not divorce his previous wife. The man even remembered those moments when he stood behind many ladies of noble birth, looked at them, and did not understand whether they liked him or whether they wanted to be with him, because he was the son of a duke. And now he is standing in front of the one and only lady in his life, who smiles at him and speaks so easily about her love for him that he is even in shock because he never thought that someone could like her. He looked at Belle and was in no hurry to say anything, not understanding whether she really loved him or whether her parents were so poor that they did not teach her etiquette, or perhaps they wanted to marry her off to a rich man. Then he decided to look back and realized that he liked the pure-hearted, sweet, and innocent Heidi better, who would surely please everyone, but the one who immediately decided to confess her feelings stood in his way. Having thought everything over, and even more, Sill looked at Belle confidently and a little angrily and firmly told her that he would not marry her, after which he tactfully apologized as if he wanted to end everything there. And while no one was looking, the protagonist of the story turned to Lolo, who was flying nearby, showed him her fist angrily, and asked if she would fail the mission if she told Sill that everything was fine, and Lolo replied that it was. As soon as the monster replied that she had already completed her task, the girl with golden hair turned to Sill again and said that she accepted his answer, also laughing so artificially as if it was all a show. After that, the heroine continued to smile in front of Sill, which made him feel very awkward, while Lolo was on Belle's shoulder, saying that she did everything perfectly. But when Belle continued to look at the purple-haired boy, Sill did not understand anything about her intentions, which made him feel awkward, thinking that the lady just wanted to ridicule or scold him. Meanwhile, the banquet was already in full swing, which is why all the aristocrats in the hall were talking among themselves, with glasses of wine, and no longer paying attention to Sill and Belle, because they had more interesting things to do. Also, among the guests at the celebration was Belle's stepmother, a lover who whispered in her ear that Belle had found Noah and was now talking to Rassam's son, which greatly surprised the mother. The mother, thinking that her stepdaughter was spending time with Argus again, became very angry and said that she would teach her a lesson, looking away and already preparing to find Belle with her gaze. Then the butler whispered in her ear again, saying that she had misunderstood everything and that Belle was now spending time with Sill, which surprised the woman even more than before. The disgruntled stepmother looked at the butler and asked when her stepdaughter had already managed to meet not only Argus, but also Sill. And to this Ash only replied that it seemed to him that Belle wanted to sit on 2 chairs. To this, the stepmother only put her hands on her belt and indignantly said that Belle shouldn't even walk near them, since it was very dangerous, and she was talking not only with Argus, but also with Sill, their main competitors. Meanwhile, the protagonist of the story was already happy that she had completed the task very well, which is why she smiled at everyone listening, from Lolo flying nearby, that she would be able to activate the gift when she returned home. She even clenched her fist and told herself that being a passerby in a novel is not that difficult and even makes her happy, which is why she wants to continue being a secondary character. And while the main character couldn't get enough of her success, the one who already knew her sat quietly in his office, where there were many shelves with various books, a table and chairs for interviews. He only heard from the servant that Belle had decided to confess her love to someone and also asked to become his wife, and immediately squeezed the glass of wine in his hand with all his strength, asking the butler how this was possible. The man turned out to be Argus, with white hair, dark skin, and a very dissatisfied face, who looked forward with incredible rage and asked as if to himself how Belle could ask someone to marry her. All this was told to the Duke by his personal butler, who bowed to his master with his eyes closed, saying that it was all the pure truth and that he himself had seen it and heard it with his own eyes and ears. Because of this, Duke Argus lowered his red, upset eyes down mistakenly, thinking that Belle didn't like him, only because her heart was already occupied by the hated Sill. And when the furious Argus began to ask whether she had decided to humiliate him in this way, since it was a sign that Sill was his most sworn enemy, the butler only wiped the sweat from his face with a napkin, saying that this was most likely a misunderstanding, since today was only Sill's first meeting with Belle. Then the even more dissatisfied Duke with red eyes looked at his servant and seemed to be putting together a puzzle in his mind, because the most terrible thought he could imagine was born in his head. He immediately stood up from his seat and looked at the butler with displeasure, asking if he meant that Belle not only loved Sill, but fell in love with him at first sight, deciding to confess her feelings to him at their first meeting. Argus was not going to ignore this, which is why he was already making important decisions, while the banquet continued with various aristocrats walking around the hall with columns and a luxurious break. Sasha also managed to notice the strange fair-haired beauty next to Sill, who looked at the couple with displeasure and asked her friend next to her who it was that was next to Mr. Rassam. The two girls continued to watch Belle with Sill on the side, while Sasha's friend replied that it seemed like this was the daughter of the Karen family, and to this, the displeased older sister Heidi asked how she dared to talk to her love. And while the green-eyed lady in red continued to watch her competitor, her friend whispered in her ear that she had heard that her father had died, and that since the economy in her county was terrible, she wanted to marry a rich man. In response to this, Sasha in a red dress only crossed her arms and looked down on Belle, saying that she would not allow her to cling to her fiancé just because of Sill's wealth, and therefore intended to eliminate her. Sasha decided to act quickly, so after a while, an unknown servant approached the main character, bowed and said that his mistress wanted to see her. Belle, with a puzzled expression on her face, asked who his mistress was, and the servant with blue hair replied that it was Sasha from the Mount Bennett family, who was already waiting for her for a personal conversation. Belle, who didn't understand anything, decided to raise her head and ask Lolo what else the secondary heroine Sasha wanted from her, to which the monster replied that she was most likely jealous of her towards Sill. That's why she wanted to talk. This made Belle grab her head and hang it down, realizing that when she wanted to complete one task and end it all, she only made things worse by creating new problems for herself because of some girl. And unexpectedly, for the protagonist, Heidi turned to her and, taking her hands, said that she would go with her to talk, which Belle was very surprised at, looking at the girl with wide eyes. Heidi tilted her head to the side and looked in the same direction when she realized that if both her older sister and Belle loved Mrs. Sill, Sasha would definitely try to harm her friend, which she really didn't want. To this, the heroine with golden hair only smiled, answering Heidi that she did not need to follow her since she could handle everything herself. But in fact, she wanted Heidi, like the main character in the novel, to spend time not on her, but on Sill. At that moment, Belle remembered something and imagined Sill in her head, wearing a mask holding Sasha and Heidi in his arms, recalling that in the original, Sill was having an affair with two sisters at the same time, in order to hide his true lover from Argus. Belle had already realized that in Sill's hands, the girls were just a tool against the villain, but she still imagined Sill with Sasha, who was looking back at Heidi, realizing that Sasha still believed in their artificial love. Remembering all this, the golden-haired lady with crimson eyes looked at Sasha's servant with a smile and told him to betray that she wanted to talk to her mistress later in a better environment. She decided to say this because she wanted Sasha to come to her herself if she really wanted to talk, but she still had a lot of things to do as a simple passerby, which is why she was angry, crossing her arms over her chest. But Madame also made such decisions for the reason that now she only wants to present sugar to the emperor, which is why she clenched her hand into a fist with enthusiasm and began to smile, because now she will fulfill her goal. However, Sasha herself did not even take her green eyes off Belle, saying that she knew her intentions perfectly well and understood that it was she who wanted to take away her fiancé and marry Sill, whom she loved. So she unfurled her fan and looked slyly at the story's protagonist, with a smile asking if she needed any help with a voice, like there was an interesting show about to happen. The girl with crimson eyes instantly looked at the lady in red she knew, and realized that it wouldn't be so easy to leave her if she decided to approach her and talk about the Force, to find out who she really was. Belle lowered her head once again and buried her face with her hand, not understanding why Sasha was still picking on her if she had hinted that it was better not to approach her and stay away. But she still decided to feign politeness and goodwill, so she looked at Sasha with a smile and asked her if she wanted to help her, also shouting out the name of the brunette in the red dress. Sasha just smiled falsely and said that she really wanted to help her, saying this with her eyes closed, as if there was not only a lie in her words, but also some kind of motive. The next moment, Sasha, with brown hair and eyes like a snake, looked at her competitor with anger and a smile, thinking that after talking to her, Sill would not even look at her, even if she had incredible golden hair and an attractive appearance. But Belle, looking at the brunette with sparkles in her eyes, continued to imitate politeness, just like Sasha herself, as if they were not enemies, but ordinary acquaintances who were about to get to know each other better. The lady took a handkerchief from her blue dress and wiped away her tears, pretending to be a seal, and telling Sasha with regret that in fact her stepmother had brought her to the banquet in order to arrange a blind date. Also unpredictable, Belle suddenly raised her hands and told Sasha with a smile that in a while her stepmother would appear and send her to meet a strange man, and she wanted Sasha to go instead of her. Hearing a very strange request from the lady, Sasha was not only surprised, but also fell into a stupor, distorting a smile on her face and sweating profusely, asking the beauty what she meant. And Sill, standing nearby and sincerely not understanding why Belle confessed her love to him and wanted to marry him, also overheard all of this if she already had a meeting scheduled with the ideal candidate. Still sweating, the girl began to nervously wave her fan, saying that, unfortunately, she would not be able to do anything on her behalf, especially in such an important matter as a forehead, so she would only ask which family she was meeting with. When the conversation turned to family, Belle just remembered that, according to the plot, George, with whom her stepmother is trying to set her up, is in fact Sasha's servant, which is why she imagined him while the hand of his older sister Heidi is lying on his head. Imagining Sasha herself, who loved to treat everyone like animals and dogs on a leash, Belle asked herself in surprise whether something terrible would happen if she said that she was going on a date with George. But as soon as she opened her lips to say the name of the person she would be going on a date with, a new character appeared on the horizon, confidently walking towards the girls and clicking his shoes on the light stone floor. It turned out to be Argus, angry at everyone who confidently walked towards the main character, and loudly told everyone that it was with him that Belle intended to go on a date, which she was now telling Sasha about. The golden-haired beauty quickly turned her head towards the white-haired Duke, and he also looked at her, while the girl did not understand what he imagined himself to be, and why he decided to appear at such an unexpected moment. Even Sill was surprised by the appearance of his sworn enemy, who looked at Argus with wide miniature eyes, because he knows very well that his opponent does not like noisy banquets. But then something forced him to come out into the world. But what surprised everyone even more was that Duke Argus, who had never been able to stand women his whole life, suddenly touched Belle, or rather took her by the hand, and dragged her along on a date, which the lady was very surprised at, not understanding what was going on. The surprised beauty with crimson eyes opened her eyelids wide, shouting at Argus and asking where he was going to take her, because even she did not expect his sudden appearance, and with such strange intentions. And suddenly, Sill also wanted to intervene in the misunderstanding between the characters, because he instantly grabbed the lady with golden hair by the free hand, looking at her and asking her to stop and wait. Belle turned her head towards him and looked into his eyes in surprise, not understanding anything that Duke Argus had done, but with a serious face, because she sees in the Force not only an enemy, but also a competitor. While Belle was still confused about the situation she was in, Sill looked at her with complete seriousness, asking if she wanted to go with him and be his companion today if she liked him so much. This did not please Duke Argus at all, who looked at the girl persistently and angrily, and briefly told her to go with him and not pay attention to such an absurd person as Sill. Belle ended up in a very awkward situation, partly her own fault, as she continued to stare in surprise at Argus, who refused to let go of her hand and waited for her to agree to go on a date with him. On the other side, the girl's free hand was held by Sill, with violet eyes, who suddenly became not indifferent to Belle, and to whom he also invited to spend time together, waiting to hear a positive answer. Unlike his opponent and rival, who insisted that the golden-haired girl go with him, Sill, on the contrary, told Belle to stay and spend time with him. Finding herself between two fires, the protagonist of the story did not know what to do in such a situation, so she decided to turn to her friend Lolo, asking what to do when she was flying around her head. But the monster only replied with sadness on his face that she just needed to stay in her role as a passerby in the story, since because of this, her task could fail, and she might not complete it. The golden-haired lady, unsure even of herself, smiled naively at Lolo and thanked him, while a drop of cold sweat trickled down her face from excitement. And while she thanked her friend, then she decided to act extremely radically and persistently, so she showed Duke Argus her fist and angrily told him to immediately let go of her hand, since she didn't like it at all. In response, the man with dark skin and red eyes only frowned even more, looking with such an angry look only at Belle, and clarifying with her that she meant that he denied her refusal. But while Argus could not understand whether Belle was rejecting him, only because of the damn Sill, whom he hated so much, and was fighting with his enemy, abruptly pulled the lady's hand towards himself. Even the protagonist herself was speechless from shock when she felt herself collide with the back of the purple-haired boy, who looked at Argus with disdain and asked where he was going to take her partner. Argus just looked at the golden-haired girl, to whom he was clearly not indifferent, saying her name in such a low tone that the lady shrugged her shoulders as if the Duke was about to scold her. While Belle couldn't understand why Argus couldn't speak to her in a normal tone, the Duke himself kept his red eyes on her, asking if she was sure she didn't want to go on a date with him. Out of nervousness, the lady began to say the strangest things, so as not to seem even stranger. So then, when many drops of sweat were running down her face, she hesitantly said that she wanted to go with Sill since she liked him. The girl hoped that Argus would leave her alone, because she did not want to get involved in this, because she was a simple passerby in history, but the Duke only leaned towards her, asking what she liked about the Force. And while Belle seemed to have swallowed her tongue, in fear, Sill himself also agreed with Argus's words, asking the lady with folded hands what she liked about him, that she decided to confess her love to him. From excitement and shock, the protagonist did not know what to answer, or where to run. She wanted to grab her head, but looked at the flying Lolo and asked what she should do, but he only shrugged his shoulders. And Heidi was watching all this, and she was even more horrified, clearly noticing how embarrassed her friend was, which also made her feel uneasy because of her worry for Belle. But the behavior of the two heirs in front of Belle caused even more emotions in Sasha, who sincerely envied her, and with anger on her face, did not understand why she was attracting so much male attention. When envious Sasha was waiting for an answer from Belle, and she herself did not know how to prove to everyone that she supposedly liked Sill, she parted her lips, realizing that she just needed to praise him in front of everyone, and then he would believe her. It was with these thoughts that the girl instantly beamed with a smile and said that she liked Sill because of his talent, beauty, height, and also because he was a generally charming man who was hard to pass by. And while the girl was hoping that everyone would take her word for it, Argus only leaned towards her a little more and asked if she really did like these things in people. He continued to gaze at the heroine with his red eyes, as if wanting to penetrate her soul, admitting that earlier he sincerely thought that she was different from others, although in fact she was the same as all the ladies at court. Then Argus remembered that after the appearance of that woman in his life, who gave birth to Sill to his father, his life turned upside down, and all because of his father, who had taken a mistress while still married. Remembering how little Argus often fought with his half-brother Sill with swords, he understood that he was the rightful heir of the family, but his father paid all his attention only to his brother. Having imagined himself as small behind his real self, Argus never understood in his entire life why Sill got everything and he got nothing, despite the fact that he tried harder than everyone else, yet never received love from others. While Argus was thinking about this with a clearly gloomy face, the main character continued to look at him with apprehension, asking Lolo, who was flying nearby, if he would start a fight now. But the monster only remained silent. But Sill, meanwhile, already felt his victory over his brother, And so he crossed his arms over his chest, with a smile looking at Argos, and telling him that he shouldn't try to get Belle like that, since she wasn't interested in him. This only further angered and plundered the heroine, who looked at Sill with displeasure, not understanding why he seemed to be adding fuel to the fire here if he already liked Heidi. However, here the girl remembered in time the main couple of the novel, Sill and Heidi, realizing that Sill used all the women he met, except Heidi herself, because he loved only her. Because of this, Belle sadly lowered her head, realizing not only that she too had become a tool for such an insidious person as Sill, but also realizing that he was even more unpleasant than anyone here, even though he was the main character. She imagined Argos on the throne in her head, realizing that in this regard, he was even better because he suffered from hatred towards them like a villain, and Sill only used the girls without shame and the right to true love. It seemed Argus still had something to say, because he turned to Sill and asked if he had anything else he wanted to say, and if he was deliberately provoking him. But he only answered his stepbrother with a smile, gesturing with his hand, and saying that he just wanted Argos to accept reality and no longer force the lady to do anything because everything was already clear. After this, the man turned to Belle again and asked her with a serious face if she wanted to go with him, because he knew how treacherous Sill and the Mount Bennet sisters were, and that she could very easily suffer from them. And while Argos was thinking about how he seemed to be interfering in something that wasn't his business, the girl pretended to be thinking, although she stood there uncertainly and really wanted someone to save her from the awkwardness and interrupt the situation right now. This is what happened, because suddenly, Belle heard a loud, unpleasant female voice behind her, which shouted her name and said that it had been looking for her, while she herself raised her eyelids in surprise. That person turned out to be her stepmother, in a blue dress, who was already coming down the stairs towards her, and asking with displeasure whether she should be on a blind date now and not be just anywhere. And after some time, when the whole situation was resolved, the protagonist of the story walked in a sad mood behind her stepmother, who with her arms crossed over her chest, said that she couldn't get involved with two sons of Rassam at once because it was dangerous.